plate shattered before anyone could scream. 3 men in $1,000 suits had a woman cornered, and the entire restaurant held its breath, except for one man in a paint-stained shirt who moved like a shadow. 15 seconds. That's all it took for Ryan Carter to remind everyone that some men are built different. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale of courage travels. This is a story about the quiet protectors among us. The Friday night crowd at Romano's Italian restaurant hummed with the comfortable noise of families decompressing from the week, silverware clinking against ceramic plates, children's laughter bubbling up from corner booths, the aromatic symphony of garlic, basil, and fresh-baked bread filling the air like an edible embrace. In Cedar Falls, a town of 23,000 souls nestled in the heartland where everyone knew their neighbors and doors stayed unlocked, Romano's wasn't just a restaurant. It was a tradition. It was where Little League teams celebrated championships, where high school sweethearts had first dates, where generations gathered to mark the passages of life. Ryan Carter sat in booth 7, the same booth he'd occupied every Friday night for the past 3 years, his broad shoulders slightly hunched over a checkered tablecloth that had seen better days. At 36, Ryan carried himself with the careful economy of movement that comes from years of discipline, though most people in Cedar Falls just saw a tired single dad in work clothes. His plumber's shirt, navy blue with Carter & Sons Plumbing, embroidered in fading red thread, bore the honest stains of a week spent under sinks and crawling through basements. Paint flecks dotted his forearms, remnants of helping old Mrs. Henderson repaint her kitchen that afternoon, because that's what you did in Cedar Falls when your elderly neighbor needed help. Across from him, 8-year-old Zoe Carter was lost in her own world, her small fingers wrapped around a purple crayon as she meticulously colored a drawing of what appeared to be a dragon wearing a tutu. Her honey brown hair, so much like her mother's it sometimes stopped Ryan's heart, fell in 2 neat braids down her back, tied with the rainbow ribbons she'd insisted on wearing that morning. She hummed tunelessly as she worked, occasionally pausing to examine her artistic choices with the gravity of a Renaissance master. "Daddy, do you think dragons can be ballerinas?" Zoe asked, without looking up, her voice carrying that particular blend of curiosity and absolute certainty that only 8-year-olds possess. Ryan felt the familiar tug in his chest, the one that came every time she called him Daddy, in that unselfconscious way, like he was her whole world. "I think dragons can be whatever they want to be, sweetheart," he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. 3 years since Sarah's death, and he still hadn't mastered the art of casual conversation without the weight of grief pressing down on his words. "That's what I thought," Zoe said matter-of-factly, returning to her work. "Mrs. Patterson said girls should be realistic about their dreams, but I don't think Mrs. Patterson has ever met a dragon." Ryan smiled despite himself. His daughter's 3rd-grade teacher was a 60-year-old institution at Cedar Falls Elementary, beloved for her traditional values and questionable for her limited imagination. "Mrs. Patterson probably has a point about some things, but I'm with you on the dragon ballerinas." The waitress appeared, Maria Gonzalez, Romano's fixture for 15 years, who knew every regular's order by heart and kept pictures of her 3 grandchildren in her apron pocket. "The usual, Ryan? Large pepperoni, extra cheese, and a Sprite for the artist?" "You know us too well, Maria," Ryan said, and the routine of it felt like armor. Like, if he could just keep doing the same things in the same way, maybe the world would stay manageable. Maybe the nightmares would stay buried. Maybe he could be just a plumber, just a dad, and not the man he used to be. Maria winked at Zoe. "I'll bring extra crayons. I hear we're working on something important tonight." "Very important," Zoe confirmed seriously. "This is Princess Flameheart, and she's going to perform Swan Lake, but with more fire breathing." As Maria headed back toward the kitchen, Ryan let his gaze drift across the familiar landscape of Romano's. The Hendersons sat 3 booths down, celebrating their 40th anniversary with their children and grandchildren clustered around like satellites. Coach Morrison was at the bar, nursing his usual beer and probably replaying last night's basketball game in his mind. Cedar Falls High had lost by 2 points, a tragedy that would fuel coffee shop conversations for weeks. The Johnson twins, home from college, were attempting to recreate their teenage memories while their parents watched with indulgent smiles. This was the life Ryan had chosen. This was the life he'd fought for, the boring, beautiful ordinariness of it. The predictable rhythm of small-town Friday nights, where the biggest drama was usually someone's overcooked lasagna or the high school quarterback's latest romantic entanglement. He'd left the other world behind, the world of darkness and chaos, of split-second decisions and permanent consequences. The world where Ryan Carter wasn't a plumber, but a weapon, honed and deployed in places that didn't appear on maps, against enemies who existed in the shadows between official acknowledgement and complete denial. 8 years as a Navy SEAL, 4 deployments, missions he couldn't discuss with anyone who hadn't signed the same blood-inked contracts with fate. That Ryan Carter had died, or should have died, on a mission outside Kandahar when an IED had torn through their convoy. He'd survived, came home to Sarah's diagnosis, stage 4 breast cancer, the doctor had said with practiced sympathy, as if giving it a stage number made it more manageable, and spent 18 months watching the love of his life disappear by degrees. When Sarah died, he'd made a promise at her bedside, her hand so light in his it felt like holding a memory. He would give Zoe the childhood Sarah had dreamed of. Stability, safety, normal. So Ryan Carter the SEAL became Ryan Carter the plumber, inheriting his late father's business and his father's sensible approach to life. He bought a modest 3-bedroom house on Maple Street with a tire swing in the backyard that he'd hung on the old oak tree's strongest branch. He coached Zoe's soccer team, though his tactical approach to 8-year-old athletics sometimes raised eyebrows among the other parents. He attended parent-teacher conferences and baked, admittedly mediocre, cupcakes for school events, and learned to braid hair through YouTube videos watched late at night when the insomnia came. The nightmares still found him. They always would. But here, in the warm glow of Romano's on a Friday night with his daughter coloring dragons, Ryan could almost convince himself that the man he used to be was just a story he'd once heard about someone else. The door chimed as new customers entered, and Ryan's awareness flickered automatically, a survival instinct he'd never been able to fully suppress. 3 men, mid-30s to early 40s, expensive suits that didn't match Cedar Falls' usual Friday night casual attire. The first man wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Ryan's truck, his dark hair slicked back with the kind of precision that suggested a standing appointment with an expensive barber. The second was broader, built like a linebacker gone slightly soft around the middle, his navy suit straining across his shoulders. The third was lean and wiry, with the restless energy of a man who'd consumed too much coffee and not enough conscience. They didn't move like locals. They moved with the aggressive entitlement of men who were used to people getting out of their way. Ryan's internal threat assessment, a process he'd tried to suppress but couldn't, registered them as potential problems and then dismissed it. Cedar Falls was safe. This was his sanctuary. These were probably just businessmen passing through, stopping for dinner before heading to Des Moines or Minneapolis or wherever men in expensive suits went. He returned his attention to Zoe, who was now narrating Princess Flameheart's backstory in elaborate detail, something involving a tragic fire at the Royal Ballet Academy and a prophecy about dancing dragons bringing peace to the kingdom. Ryan made the appropriate sounds of interest, only half listening but wholly present in the way that matters to children, his entire being focused on this small person who'd become his entire reason for existing. Maria returned with their drinks, Sprite for Zoe in a plastic cup with a bendable straw, water with lemon for Ryan, and the comfortable ritual of Friday night continued to unfold. Around them, Cedar Falls lived its collective life, beautifully unaware that in booth 7 sat a man who'd killed more people than anyone in this restaurant could imagine, who'd led raids in 3 countries, who'd earned commendations that would never be publicly acknowledged, who'd seen things that would turn their small-town nightmares into waking screams. But that was then. This was now, and now was... The sound reached him before the conscious awareness of what he was hearing. A woman's voice, sharp with fear disguised as firmness. "I said no. Please leave me alone." Ryan's head turned automatically, his body responding before his mind had fully processed the input. 3 booths away, near the far wall where the lighting was slightly dimmer, the 3 men in suits had arranged themselves around a booth occupied by a single woman. She was mid-30s, Hispanic, with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, wearing a blazer and slacks that suggested she'd come straight from an office. Her laptop was open in front of her, papers spread across the table. The setup of someone who'd chosen a restaurant booth as a temporary office because sometimes that was easier than going home to an empty apartment. The woman's posture was rigid, her hands visible on the table in a carefully non-threatening position, but her eyes, even from this distance, Ryan could read the calculation in her eyes, the trapped animal weighing its options. "Ms. Martinez," the man in the charcoal suit said, his voice carrying just enough to reach Ryan's ears. His tone was friendly, but it was the kind of friendly that came with teeth. "We're just trying to have a conversation. Our employer is a reasonable man. He's prepared to make a very generous offer." "I don't negotiate in restaurants," the woman, Martinez, replied, her voice steady despite the fear Ryan could detect underneath. "If your employer wants to discuss settlement terms, he can contact me through proper legal channels during business hours." The broader man leaned in closer, his hand coming to rest on the back of her booth seat, a gesture that was technically non-threatening but functionally a cage. "See, that's the thing. Our boss, he feels like maybe you're not taking his generous nature seriously. Maybe you need some help understanding the situation." Ryan's hand tightened around his water glass. Around him, Romano's continued its oblivious Friday night performance. The Hendersons were laughing at something their grandson said. Coach Morrison was arguing with the bartender about a referee's call. The ambient noise that had felt comforting 30 seconds ago now felt like static obscuring something important. "Daddy?" Zoe's voice cut through his focus. "Are you okay? You're making your thinking face." Ryan forced himself to breathe, to smile at his daughter. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just remembered something I need to do at work Monday." The lie tasted familiar, shaped by years of practice. Sarah had always known when he was lying, but Zoe was 8, and 8-year-olds could still be protected with careful untruths. He tried to turn back to his daughter, to force himself to be present in this moment, to remember his promise to Sarah. This wasn't his problem. He'd left that life behind. Cedar Falls had police, good people who could handle a situation if it escalated. His job was to be Zoe's father, not to be the man who fixed problems with violence. But his peripheral vision kept that booth in constant awareness. The 3 men hadn't left. If anything, they'd moved closer, their body language shifting from aggressive friendliness to something darker. The lean, wiry one had positioned himself to block Martinez's exit from the booth. The broader man's hand had moved from the back of the seat to the table itself, his fingers drumming in a pattern that Ryan recognized from 1,000 interrogations he'd witnessed or conducted, the false casualness of someone preparing to escalate. "Miss Martinez," the charcoal suit continued, "you're making this harder than it needs to be. We know where your office is. We know about your apartment on 7th Street. We know you like to go running at Grant Park every morning at 6. We're just trying to help you understand that some cases aren't worth pursuing. Some fights, you can't win." The threat was naked now, stripped of any pretense of professional courtesy. Ryan watched Martinez's hands. They'd moved from the table to her lap, probably clutching her phone. Her eyes darted toward the front of the restaurant, calculating distances, exit routes, help that might or might not come. And still, Romano's hummed on, oblivious. Because this was Cedar Falls, where bad things didn't happen, where men in expensive suits didn't threaten lawyers in family restaurants, where the monsters stayed in movies and bedtime stories and faraway places that good people didn't have to think about. Ryan's heartbeat had slowed, dropping into that strange calm that always preceded action. It was happening again. The transformation he'd fought against for 3 years. His breathing became measured, automatic. His awareness expanded, cataloging everything. The positions of every person in the restaurant, the exits, the potential weapons, a steak knife at the next table, a wine bottle at the bar, his own body, always his own body. The angles of attack and defense, the timing required to neutralize 3 threats before they could respond. No. He pressed his palms flat against the table. No. That wasn't who he was anymore. He was Ryan Carter, plumber, single dad, coach of the worst 8 and under soccer team in Cedar Falls history. He was the man who helped Mrs. Henderson paint her kitchen and baked mediocre cupcakes and struggled with his daughter's math homework. He wasn't... "Please," Martinez said, her voice cracking slightly. "Just leave me alone." The broad man laughed, low and ugly. "Or what? You gonna call the cops in this little hick town? You think that matters? You think... His hand shot out, grabbing Martinez's wrist. Not hard enough to leave marks that would photograph well, but hard enough to hurt. Hard enough to terrify. Martinez tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. The charcoal suit leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that carried clearly to Ryan's enhanced hearing. You have until Monday to drop the Castellanos case, or we stop being nice. And trust me, lawyer lady, you don't want to see us when we're not nice. Something broke inside Ryan Carter, or maybe something that had never fully healed finally snapped back into place. He stood. The movement was smooth, unhurried, drawing no attention. Zoe looked up, her crayon paused mid-stroke. Daddy? Stay here, sweetheart, Ryan said, his voice calm, the same tone he used when telling her it was time for bed or that she needed to finish her vegetables. I'll be right back. Don't leave the booth. Okay, Zoe said, confusion flickering across her face, but trusting him the way children trust their parents, absolutely and without question. Ryan crossed the distance between booth 7 and Martinez's booth in 6 strides. He didn't run. He didn't hurry. He simply moved with the fluid economy of someone who'd spent thousands of hours learning how to move through space with maximum efficiency. The 3 men were so focused on Martinez they didn't notice him until he was already there, close enough that his shadow fell across their expensive suits. Gentlemen, Ryan said, his voice friendly, conversational, with just a hint of that Midwestern neighborliness that Cedar Falls expected from its residents. I couldn't help but notice the lady asked you to leave her alone. Maybe you didn't hear her. The charcoal suit turned, annoyance flashing across his face before being replaced with dismissive assessment. He saw what everyone in Cedar Falls saw. A plumber in dirty work clothes, probably uneducated, definitely not a threat. Just another small-town nobody playing hero. This is a private conversation, friend. Why don't you go back to your dinner? Can't do that, Ryan replied, his tone apologetic, but his body language shifting in ways these men couldn't read but would feel. His weight settled into his stance, his center of gravity dropping slightly, his hands hanging loose at his sides but positioned for instant response. You see, my daughter's sitting right over there, and I'm trying to teach her about respect and treating people right. Having you 3 intimidate this lady, that's not setting a good example. The broad man released Martinez's wrist and stood, using his size as an argument. He had 4 inches and probably 60 pounds on Ryan. In his world, that had always been enough. You need to walk away, plumber boy, before you get hurt. Ryan felt the familiar coldness settling over him, the emotional distance that allowed him to do what needed to be done. He'd tried to avoid this. He'd given them a chance to walk away. But some men only understood one language, and Ryan was catastrophically fluent in violence. Last chance, Ryan said softly. Leave the lady alone. Walk out. We all forget this happened. The lean, wiry man laughed, a sharp bark of derision. You got a death wish, Hick? There's 3 of us and 1 of you, and we're not the kind of people you want to... What happened next took exactly 15 seconds. To the rest of Romanos, absorbed in their own Friday night worlds, it was sudden chaos. To Ryan, it unfolded in the crystalline slow motion of pure training and muscle memory. The broad man moved first, telegraphing his punch with the obviousness of someone who'd won most fights through intimidation and size rather than skill. Ryan didn't block the punch. He simply wasn't there anymore, his body moving with fluid precision as he stepped inside the man's guard. His palm strike to the solar plexus was controlled, precise, driving the air from his attacker's lungs and dropping him to his knees, gasping like a landed fish. The wiry man reached inside his jacket. Gun, Ryan's mind cataloged automatically, but his hand never reached it. Ryan's kick to the outside of his knee was measured to injure but not permanently damage, just enough force to buckle the joint and send him crashing into the table. The laptop clattered to the floor. A water glass shattered. Marinara sauce from someone's abandoned plate of spaghetti painted an abstract pattern across expensive suit fabric. The charcoal suit was faster, smarter, pulling a tactical baton from his waistband and swinging it in an arc that would have fractured Ryan's skull if it had connected. But Ryan wasn't there. He caught the man's wrist mid-swing, applied pressure to 3 specific points that turned the hand nerveless, and the baton clattered to the floor. A quick sweep took the man's legs out from under him. And then Ryan had him pinned against the booth, one arm locked behind him at an angle that promised agony if he moved. Federal offense to threaten an officer of the court, Ryan said conversationally, his breathing barely elevated despite having neutralized 3 threats in the time it took most people to comprehend what was happening. Also federal offense to cross state lines to commit intimidation. Want to guess how many laws you gentlemen just broke? Romanos had gone silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. The Hendersons stared with their forks frozen halfway to their mouths. Coach Morrison had straightened at the bar, his beer forgotten. Maria stood near the kitchen entrance with a tray of food suspended in her shocked grip. Martinez had pressed herself back into the corner of her booth, her eyes wide with a complex mixture of fear, shock, and something that might have been recognition. She was staring at Ryan like she was seeing him, really seeing him, in a way that made him deeply uncomfortable. "You—" The charcoal suit started, but Ryan increased the pressure on his arm just slightly, and the words dissolved into a grunt of pain. "I'm going to let you and your friends get up," Ryan said calmly. "You're going to walk out that door. You're going to get in whatever car you came in, and you're going to drive back to wherever you came from. And you're never going to come near Miss Martinez again. We clear?" "You have no idea who you're—" "Crystal clear," Ryan interrupted, his voice dropping to a register that carried absolutely no warmth, no humanity, the voice of a man who'd delivered final warnings to enemies in a dozen languages across 3 continents. "Because if I see you again, if I hear you came back, if Miss Martinez so much as mentions your names in connection with anything that makes her uncomfortable, I will find you, and you will discover that there are worse things than federal prison. Are we understanding each other?" The charcoal suit's face had gone pale. Something in Ryan's voice, in his eyes, had communicated what mere physical dominance couldn't, that this man was genuinely, catastrophically dangerous. "We understand," he managed. Ryan released him, stepped back, his hands returning to his sides but his body still coiled, ready. The 3 men scrambled to their feet with varying degrees of coordination. The broad man was still struggling to breathe normally. The wiry man's knee gave out once, forcing him to grab the table for support. The charcoal suit's right hand hung useless at his side, the nerves still screaming. They limped toward the exit, their expensive suits disheveled and sauce-stained, their dignity left somewhere on Romano's floor amid the broken glass and scattered papers. The entire restaurant watched them go in stunned silence. The door chimed as they pushed through it, and then they were gone, leaving behind only the settling dust of violence and the lingering electricity of potential disaster averted. Ryan turned to Martinez. "Are you okay, ma'am?" She nodded slowly, still staring at him with those 2 knowing eyes. Yes. Thank you. You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did," Ryan said simply. He bent down, gathering her scattered papers with careful hands, stacking them neatly and placing them back on her table. His movements were gentle now, utterly at odds with what those same hands had done 15 seconds ago. "You might want to file a police report. I'll give a statement if you need one." "Who are you?" Martinez asked, her voice carrying something beyond simple curiosity. "That wasn't— people don't move like that. Those weren't normal reflexes. You're just a concerned citizen," Ryan interrupted, forcing a smile that probably looked wrong, too mechanical. "Really, I'm nobody. Just— my daddy was in the Navy." The voice cut through the silence like a bell, clear and proud and completely, devastatingly innocent. Zoe had climbed out of booth 7 and was standing a few feet behind Ryan, her purple crayon still clutched in one hand, her drawing of Princess Flameheart in the other. Her face showed no fear, no shock, just simple pride in her father, because in her 8-year-old understanding, Daddy had helped someone who needed help. And that's what good people did. Every eye in Romano's turned to Zoe, then back to Ryan. He could see the recalculation happening in their faces, the pieces clicking into place, the controlled violence, the precision, the way he'd moved. Navy. Of course. Suddenly the quiet plumber made a different kind of sense, though none of them could know exactly what kind of Navy, what kind of service, what kind of man stood among them in paint-stained work clothes. Ryan's throat tightened. He wanted to rewind the last 3 minutes, to go back to the moment before he'd stood up, to choose differently. But Zoe was looking up at him with absolute trust, and Martinez was safe, and maybe that had to be enough. Sweetheart, he said softly, I asked you to stay in the booth. I know, Zoe said, walking over to slip her small hand into his, but you were taking a long time and I wanted to make sure you were okay. Plus, I thought the lady might want to see Princess Flameheart. Sometimes when people are scared, pictures help. She held up her drawing to Martinez, offering it with the unselfconscious generosity of a child who believed the world could be fixed with crayons and kindness. Martinez's eyes filled with tears. She blinked back quickly, and she took the drawing with hands that shook slightly. She's beautiful, Martinez said, her voice thick. Thank you. I'll treasure this. You can keep it, Zoe said magnanimously. I'm going to make another one anyway. Daddy, can we still have our pizza? Or did the bad men ruin pizza night? The question broke the spell. Around them, Romano's slowly creaked back to life. The Hendersons returned to their dinner with frequent glances in Ryan's direction. Coach Morrison raised his beer in a small salute. Maria disappeared into the kitchen and emerged moments later with their pizza, setting it down at booth 7 with a hand briefly, maternally, on Ryan's shoulder. Your dinner, on the house tonight, she said quietly. Thank you for doing what needed doing. Ryan could only nod, words deserting him. He guided Zoe back to their booth, helping her settle back into her coloring with the practiced ease of 3 years of single parenting. But he could feel the weight of attention, the whispers starting to circulate, the story already being shaped and reshaped with each retelling. By tomorrow morning, every person in Cedar Falls would know that quiet Ryan Carter, the plumber with the sad story about his dead wife, was actually someone else entirely. The pizza sat between them, cooling and forgotten. Zoe resumed her work on a new drawing. This one appeared to be a dragon fighting bad guys, rendered in enthusiastic purple and red. Ryan stared at his plate and tried to figure out how to be normal again, how to put the weapon back in its box, how to be just a dad again. Daddy, Zoe said without looking up from her artwork. Those were bad men, right? Like in the stories? Yeah, baby, Ryan replied. They were bad men. And you stopped them because that's what good people do. They stop bad people from hurting others. Ryan looked at his daughter, this perfect small person who somehow remained innocent despite growing up without a mother, despite having a father who woke up screaming from nightmares he couldn't explain, despite existing in a world that was so much darker and more complicated than her 8 years could comprehend. I stopped them because they were hurting someone, and I was there, Ryan said carefully. But Zoe, what happened tonight, that's not normal. That's not something that should have to happen. But it did happen, Zoe said with the implacable logic of childhood. So it's good you were there. Otherwise, who would have helped the nice lady? Who indeed, Ryan thought. The question didn't have a good answer, so he didn't try to provide one. Instead, he took a bite of pizza that tasted like ash and responsibility, and he tried to pretend that everything was still fine, still normal, still the quiet life he'd promised Sarah he'd build for their daughter. Martinez approached their booth 10 minutes later, after the initial shock had settled and Romano's had attempted to return to its regularly scheduled Friday night programming. She'd gathered her things, closed her laptop, and composed herself into professional competence, though her hand still trembled slightly as she clutched her briefcase. I'm sorry to disturb your dinner, she said, directing her words primarily to Ryan, but including a warm smile for Zoe. I just wanted to properly thank you, and to give you this. She handed Ryan a business card, Rebecca Martinez, attorney at law, Martinez and Associates, followed by an address in Kansas City and contact information. If you ever need legal help, or if those men come back, or if... They won't come back, Ryan said with certainty. He shouldn't have felt, but did. He'd seen their eyes in that final moment, the recognition of what he was. They'd spread the word to whoever employed them, and whoever that was would recalculate the cost-benefit analysis of bothering Rebecca Martinez. It wasn't perfect safety, nothing ever was, but it was enough for tonight. No, Rebecca agreed, studying him with unsettling intensity. I don't suppose they will. Mr. Carter, it is Carter, isn't it? Maria mentioned your name, what you did tonight. That wasn't just basic military training. That was just someone who was in the right place at the right time, Ryan interrupted firmly. Really, Ms. Martinez, I'm nobody special. Just a plumber trying to have pizza night with my daughter. Rebecca looked like she wanted to argue, to push, to ask the questions that were clearly burning behind her careful lawyer's eyes. But she glanced at Zoe, who was watching the exchange with interest while munching on a slice of pepperoni pizza, and some calculation passed across her face. "Of course," she said finally. "Just a good Samaritan. Still, keep the card. You never know when you might need a lawyer, and I owe you a considerable debt." After she left, after the restaurant slowly emptied and the story of what had happened began its journey through Cedar Falls gossip networks, Ryan and Zoe finished their pizza in relative quiet. Zoe chattered about Princess Flameheart's continuing adventures, and Ryan made the appropriate responses while his mind replayed the last hour, examining it from every angle, calculating the consequences. He'd broken cover. Not officially. His service record was sealed, his missions classified beyond reach of casual inquiry, but he'd shown himself. The careful fiction of Ryan Carter, unremarkable small-town plumber, had developed cracks. People would wonder, people would ask questions, and in wondering and asking, they might disturb things that were better left buried. But the alternative had been standing by while 3 men terrorized a woman in front of his daughter. That wasn't a choice he could have made and still lived with himself. Sarah would have understood that. She'd always known what he was underneath the attempt at normalcy, and she'd loved him anyway, loved him for trying to be better than what the Navy had made him. "Time to go home, sweetheart," Ryan said as Zoe finished her last bite of pizza. "You've got soccer tomorrow morning, remember?" "Oh, Daddy," Zoe groaned dramatically. "I'm terrible at soccer. Everyone knows I'm terrible at soccer." "You're enthusiastically terrible," Ryan corrected, pulling out his wallet to leave cash for the tip, despite Maria's insistence that dinner was free. He left $40 anyway. "There's a difference. Plus, you're getting better. You almost kicked the ball in the right direction last week." "I kicked it into our own goal, Daddy. That's literally the wrong direction." "But with great enthusiasm," Ryan maintained, helping her gather her crayons and drawings. "And enthusiasm counts for a lot." They walked out into the cool October evening. Cedar Falls spread around them in comfortable darkness broken by streetlights and the warm glow of windows. The town looked the same as it had when they'd arrived 2 hours ago, but something fundamental had shifted. Ryan could feel it in the way people's eyes had followed them out, in the weight of new knowledge settling over his carefully constructed anonymity. In his truck, an 11-year-old Ford with paint cans rattling in the bed and Zoe's booster seat secured in the back, Ryan paused before starting the engine. Through the windshield, Romano's glowed like a beacon, families visible through the windows, continuing their Friday nights as if the world was still safe and simple and manageable. "Daddy," Zoe said from the back seat, her voice small in the darkness, "are the bad men going to come back for you because you hurt them?" The question drove a spike of cold fear through Ryan's chest. This was what he'd been trying to avoid, not just the violence itself, but the knowledge of violence entering his daughter's world. "No, baby," he said firmly. "They're not coming back, I promise." "How do you know?" "Because I saw their eyes," Ryan thought. "Because I showed them what I am, and they understand now that coming after me would be suicide. Because in that world I left behind, reputation matters, and word travels fast. And they'll tell whoever sent them that the lawyer has a guardian angel who knows how to hurt people efficiently and without remorse." But he couldn't say that to his 8-year-old daughter, so instead he said, "Because bad men are really just scared men, and once they understand that they can't scare you, they go find easier targets. They won't bother the nice lady anymore either." "Good," Zoe said, satisfied. "I liked her. She said my drawing was beautiful." Ryan started the truck, and they drove home through streets he knew by heart, past houses belonging to people whose biggest secrets were affairs and tax evasion and the ordinary sins of ordinary people living ordinary lives. He pulled into their driveway, helped Zoe out, and they walked together up to their modest house with its tire swing and its ordinary facade hiding the extraordinary truth of what lived inside. Bath time, story time, bedtime, the familiar rituals that anchored Ryan's existence, that reminded him why he'd walked away from the other life. Zoe's eyelids were drooping by the time he finished reading Chapter 7 of their current book, something involving a girl wizard and a magical school, and he kissed her forehead gently. "I love you, baby," he whispered. "Love you too, Daddy," she murmured, already half asleep. "You're a good man. Even when you're scary, you're good." The words settled into his chest like stones as he left her room, pulling the door almost but not quite shut the way she liked it. Downstairs, in his kitchen with its aging appliances and its pictures of Sarah smiling from every wall, Ryan poured himself a bourbon he didn't drink and stood at the window looking out at his backyard, at the tire swing moving slightly in the night breeze. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Thank you again. If you ever need anything, I mean it. Rebecca Martinez." Ryan almost deleted it, almost blocked the number, almost reinforced the walls he'd built around this new life. But something stopped him. Maybe the memory of her eyes, too knowing and too afraid. Maybe the recognition that some people carried burdens that casual intervention couldn't fix. Maybe just the exhausted acknowledgement that tonight had changed things in ways he couldn't fully control. He saved the number instead and finally drank the bourbon, letting it burn away the adrenaline, the muscle memory, the ghost of who he used to be. Outside, Cedar Falls slept peacefully, protected by ordinary men and women doing ordinary jobs, and by at least one extraordinary man trying desperately to be ordinary. Trying and failing, and maybe, just maybe, that failure was its own kind of purpose. Ryan Carter went to bed that night knowing that his quiet life had developed cracks. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that Rebecca Martinez would return. That the past he'd buried wasn't as dead as he'd believed. That some debts transcend death and some promises outlive the people who made them. That 15 seconds in a restaurant would set in motion a chain of events that would force him to choose between the man he wanted to be and the man he'd been trained to become. But that knowledge would come later. Tonight, in the darkness of his bedroom where Sarah's picture still sat on his nightstand, Ryan simply closed his eyes and tried to find sleep that would hopefully be dreamless, in a town that would never quite look at him the same way again, with a daughter who believed her father was a hero, and a stranger with haunted eyes who'd seen past his carefully constructed disguise to the weapon underneath. The quiet protector had shown himself. And in showing himself, he'd reminded everyone, including himself, that some men are built different. Some men carry war inside them, like a second skeleton, and no amount of paint-stained shirts and Friday night pizzas can completely hide what they are. Ryan Carter was such a man. And Cedar Falls, for better or worse, now knew it. The knock came 3 days later, on a Monday morning when Ryan was elbow deep in Mrs. Patterson's kitchen sink, fighting with a disposal unit that had apparently decided to consume a fork and die in the process. Zoe was at school, learning about fractions and state capitals, blissfully unaware that her father's carefully reconstructed life was about to face its first real test since that Friday night at Romano's. Ryan heard his phone buzzing in his tool bag but ignored it, focusing instead on the corroded bolt that stood between him and fixing this particular problem. Mrs. Patterson hovered in the doorway, offering commentary about how her late husband would have fixed this, God rest his soul. And did Ryan think the whole unit needed replacing because the Hendersons had just had theirs replaced and it cost nearly $400? "I can get this working, Mrs. Patterson," Ryan assured her, applying torque in measured increments. "No need to replace the whole—" The bolt finally gave way with a satisfying crack. "There we go. Good as new in about 10 minutes. His phone buzzed again. And again. On the fourth buzz, Mrs. Patterson said pointedly, "Sounds like someone really needs to talk to you, dear. I can wait. At my age, patience is about all I've got left besides my cats and my opinions." Ryan wiped his hands on his work rag and pulled out his phone, expecting maybe Zoe's school. She'd been fighting a cold last week. Or possibly Coach Morrison about practice schedule changes. What he found instead were 4 missed calls and 3 text messages, all from the number he'd saved as Rebecca Martinez. The texts were brief, increasingly urgent. "Mr. Carter, I need to speak with you. It's important. Please call me when you get this. It's about Friday night. I'm in Cedar Falls. Can we meet? It's urgent." Ryan's jaw tightened. He'd spent 3 days watching his life return to something approximating normal, fielding questions from neighbors and parents at soccer practice with careful non-answers, letting the story of Friday night settle into town legend without feeding it additional fuel. The last thing he needed was the woman at the center of that story showing up to resurrect it. He texted back, "Working. Can this wait?" The response came in seconds. "I'm parked outside your house. I'll wait. This is about your service record and the men from Friday. You need to hear what I know." The word service record hit Ryan like ice water. His service record was sealed, buried under classifications and need-to-know restrictions that should have made it inaccessible to civilian lawyers from Kansas City. If Rebecca Martinez had somehow accessed it, that meant she had connections, resources, and a level of determination that transformed her from grateful victim to potential threat. "Mrs. Patterson," Ryan said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline starting to move through his system, "I need to run home for about 30 minutes. Emergency with my daughter's school. I'll come back and finish this up. No charge for the interruption." Mrs. Patterson's expression suggested she knew he was lying, but had decided to grant him the courtesy of pretending otherwise. "You go take care of what you need to take care of, Ryan. The disposal can wait. Some things can't." 20 minutes later, Ryan pulled into his driveway to find a silver Lexus sedan parked at the curb, looking as out of place on Maple Street as a diamond in a toolbox. Rebecca Martinez sat in the driver's seat, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage, her dark hair pulled back severely, professional armor firmly in place. She looked like she hadn't slept well since Friday, shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. Ryan approached the car and she got out, extending her hand with formal courtesy. "Mr. Carter, thank you for seeing me. I know I should have called ahead properly, but how did you get my address?" Ryan interrupted, not taking her hand. "And what did you mean about my service record?" Rebecca's professional composure cracked slightly. "Can we talk inside? This isn't a conversation for the street. Please. I drove 3 hours because what I need to tell you can't wait, and it definitely can't be said where neighbors might overhear." Ryan wanted to refuse, to send her back to Kansas City with a polite dismissal and a reminder that he'd done what any decent person would do, and that didn't entitle her to invade his life. But the genuine fear in her eyes, the desperation poorly hidden under her lawyer's facade, tugged at instincts he'd tried to bury. He recognized that look. He'd seen it on the faces of people who'd stumbled into something bigger than themselves. People who suddenly understood they were swimming in deeper water than they'd realized. 30 minutes, Ryan said curtly. "Then you leave, and you don't come back. We clear?" "Crystal clear," Rebecca agreed, and something in the way she said it suggested she'd heard those exact words before, in that exact tone, from someone else. Inside his house, Ryan didn't offer coffee or attempt hospitality. He stood in his living room with his arms crossed, very deliberately not inviting Rebecca to sit, keeping this interaction as brief and impersonal as possible. Sarah smiled at him from a dozen picture frames, their wedding day, holding newborn Zoe, that vacation to Yellowstone 2 months before the diagnosis, silent witness to this intrusion into the sanctuary they'd built together. Rebecca stood near the door, clutching her briefcase like a shield. "I'm going to tell you things that will sound paranoid or crazy," she began. "I need you to hear me out before you decide I'm either. Can you do that?" 30 minutes, Ryan repeated. "Clock's already running." Rebecca took a breath, and Ryan watched her make the same decision he'd seen soldiers make before patrol, the choice to step forward into danger because staying still wasn't an option. "The men who cornered me Friday night work for Victor Castellanos. Does that name mean anything to you?" Ryan kept his face carefully neutral, but internally pieces were clicking together. Victor Castellanos. Defense contractor. Multiple Pentagon contracts. Rumors of corner-cutting and falsified testing data that had circulated through military channels like toxic smoke. If you'd served in the past decade, you'd heard the name, usually followed by curses. "I know who he is," Ryan said carefully. "Major supplier of military equipment. Why?" "Because I'm the lawyer trying to prove that Castellanos Defense Systems knowingly sold defective body armor to the military," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was saying. "Armor that failed in combat. Armor that got people killed. Specifically, armor that got my father killed in Kandahar 3 years ago, along with 19 other soldiers in his unit." The room seemed to contract. Kandahar. 3 years ago. Ryan's mind raced through memories he'd tried to lock away, missions and operations and the geography of war. 3 years ago, he'd been stateside, dealing with Sarah's final months, but he'd heard about the incident. Everyone had. An IED strike that should have been survivable, but the armor had failed catastrophically. 20 dead Marines, investigation launched, and then quietly buried under national security classifications. I'm sorry about your father, Ryan said, and meant it. But I still don't understand what this has to do with me, or why you're here, or how you got my address and information about my service. Rebecca's hand tightened on her briefcase. 3 days ago, I would have told you the same thing, that this had nothing to do with you, that you were just a good Samaritan who happened to be there when I needed help. But then I did what lawyers do. I investigated. I started asking questions about the man who'd taken down 3 trained enforcers in 15 seconds without breaking a sweat. And what I found, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Ryan Carter, plumber, single father, moved to Cedar Falls 3 years ago. Before that Navy service, but all the details are sealed under classifications that shouldn't exist for ordinary sailors. No social media presence, no digital footprint beyond the absolute minimum. A ghost who suddenly materialized in small-town Iowa with a daughter and a dead wife and a very specific set of skills. But Ryan's expression went cold. You had no right to dig into my life. You're right, Rebecca agreed immediately. Under normal circumstances, I'd agree completely. But these aren't normal circumstances. Because when I started looking into you, other people noticed. Specifically, Victor Castellanos noticed. Or rather, his intelligence network noticed. And this morning, I received a very clear message through an intermediary. Drop the case, or everyone I care about will suffer, starting with the helpful plumber who stuck his nose where it didn't belong. The threat crystallized the situation instantly. Ryan moved to his front window, scanning the street with trained eyes. Everything looked normal. Mrs. Henderson walking her terrier, the mailman making his rounds, kids riding bikes home from school. But normal was exactly what surveillance teams aimed for. If Castellanos had the resources Rebecca was implying, they could be watching right now. You led them right to me, Ryan said quietly, the anger he felt bleeding into his voice despite his efforts at control. You drove here, in your own car, probably without checking if you were being followed. You brought this to my doorstep. Rebecca's face paled. I didn't think. I was careful. I made sure no one. Careful isn't the same as trained, Ryan cut her off. If Castellanos has the kind of operation you're describing, careful doesn't matter. They have your phone tracked, your car tagged, probably your credit cards monitored. Coming here was the worst possible move you could have made. Then I'm sorry, Rebecca said, and now there were tears threatening behind her professional composure. I'm so sorry, but I didn't know where else to go. My father died because Victor Castellanos sold defective armor and covered it up. I have evidence. Documents he died getting out of a classified facility, test results that prove the armor failed specifications, emails showing Castellanos knew and sold it anyway. 20 Marines died, Ryan. 20 men and women who trusted that the equipment they wore would protect them, and Castellanos made $40 million. Ryan closed his eyes, fighting against the pull of old loyalties, old obligations. This wasn't his fight. He'd left that world behind. His duty now was to Zoe, to the quiet life, to the promise he'd made Sarah. Getting involved in a case against a major defense contractor with the resources to threaten federal witnesses was the opposite of keeping his head down and protecting his daughter. But 20 Marines, defective armor, the kind of corruption that murdered people wrapped in the flag and justified by national security. This was exactly the kind of thing he'd joined the Navy to fight, even if the enemy wore suits instead of uniforms. Show me the evidence, Ryan heard himself say, hating the words even as they left his mouth. Rebecca's relief was palpable. She opened her briefcase with shaking hands and pulled out a slim folder, setting it on Ryan's coffee table. These are copies. The originals are in a safety deposit box in 3 different banks under 3 different names. My father was a Marine captain, Intelligence Division. He'd been investigating equipment failures for 6 months when he was killed. He sent these to me 2 days before he died with instructions to get them to the right people if anything happened to him. Ryan opened the folder. Inside were technical specifications for body armor, test results showing failure rates far above acceptable standards, and a series of emails between Castellanos executives discussing how to bury the data and push the product to deployment anyway. The casual way they discussed soldiers' lives, acceptable risk factors, and statistical anomalies within projected parameters made Ryan's stomach turn. One email stood out, dated 2 weeks before the Kandahar incident. Rodriguez is asking too many questions, taking care of it. Product ships on schedule. Taking care of it, Ryan read aloud. Your father, Captain Benjamin Rodriguez, Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion she was fighting to control. He was 52 years old. He loved terrible jokes, and he taught me to play chess, and he believed in the Corps with everything he had. And Victor Castellanos had him killed because he was going to expose this. The official report said IED, Ryan said, but it was a question. The official report said a lot of things. But my father's commanding officer, off the record, after he'd had enough whiskey to drown his conscience, told me the IED shouldn't have been lethal. The armor should have stopped the shrapnel. That's its entire purpose. But it failed, across 20 Marines, all wearing Castellanos equipment. One device shouldn't have killed that many people, Ryan. Not unless their protection was defective. Ryan studied the documents, his mind automatically shifting into operational analysis. The evidence was solid but not slam dunk. A good defense attorney could argue testing anomalies, could suggest the IED was simply more powerful than initially assessed, could bury this in enough reasonable doubt that a military tribunal would side with the contractor. Taking down someone like Castellanos would require more than documents. It would require testimony, corroboration, and a willingness to wade through legal warfare that could last years. Why haven't you gone to the DOJ or the Pentagon Inspector General? Ryan asked. This is bigger than one lawyer can handle. I tried, Rebecca said bitterly. I've sent this evidence to every oversight committee, every inspector general, every congressperson I could find. And either I get ignored or I get polite letters thanking me for my concern and assuring me the matter is being investigated. Meanwhile, Castellanos keeps operating, keeps supplying equipment, keeps making money. The system is designed to protect people like him, not to prosecute them. So you decided to file a civil suit instead. Wrongful death, product liability, fraudulent misrepresentation, every charge I could make stick in civilian court where the rules are different and classified material can be subpoenaed. I was making progress, getting depositions, building a case. And then Castellanos' people found me in Cedar Falls and made it very clear that progress was going to cost me everything I cared about. Ryan closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. I'm sorry for your loss, Ms. Martinez. I'm sorry about what happened to your father and those Marines, but this isn't my fight. I have a daughter to protect, a life I've built that doesn't include taking on defense contractors and their enforcement teams. You need to take this evidence to the FBI, go into witness protection if necessary, and let people whose job it is to handle this kind of thing do their job. The FBI can't protect me, Rebecca said desperately. Don't you understand? Castellanos has connections at every level. The only reason I'm still alive is because killing a lawyer pursuing a public case would raise too many questions. But you're nobody official. You're a plumber who interfered. He can make you disappear without any connection to the case, and no one would question it. The words hit home because they were true. Ryan had been thinking it himself since she'd mentioned Castellanos' name. By getting involved Friday night, he'd painted a target on his back without realizing it. But there was a vast difference between being targeted and actively stepping deeper into the line of fire. That's all the more reason for me to stay out of it, Ryan said firmly. You should go, Miss Martinez. Forget you came here. Forget I exist. Find another way to fight your fight, one that doesn't involve me or my daughter. Rebecca stood slowly, defeat written across her features. She gathered her briefcase and moved toward the door, then paused. My father saved a Navy SEAL's life. Did you know that? It was classified, part of an operation that officially never happened. But he told me about it once, after too much wine at Thanksgiving. Said he'd pulled a wounded SEAL out of an ambush, carried him 2 miles to an extraction point while taking fire. Said that SEAL went on to save a lot of other lives. Ryan's blood went cold. What are you saying? I'm saying my father was in Kandahar in 2017, attached to Special Operations. I'm saying the wounded SEAL he pulled out was named Carter. I'm saying the man who saved your life died trying to expose the corruption that got 20 of his Marines killed. And now I'm asking you, begging you, to honor that debt. The room spun. Ryan grabbed the back of his couch to steady himself, memories flooding back with brutal clarity. the ambush outside Kandahar, the bullet that had shattered his femur, the Marine officer who'd appeared out of nowhere, hauling Ryan over his shoulder while enemy fire stitched the ground around them. The face he'd seen for maybe 30 seconds before shock and blood loss had taken him under. Weathered, determined, decorated with old scars and new worry lines. Captain Benjamin Rodriguez. The man who'd saved Ryan's life had died 3 years later because of defective armor sold by a contractor who valued profit over protection. "You should have led with that," Ryan said, his voice hoarse. "Would it have changed anything?" Rebecca asked. "Or would you have just felt guilty while still saying no?" Honest question. Ryan didn't have an honest answer. He walked to the window again, staring out at Maple Street, at the carefully ordinary life he'd built on the foundation of promises and losses, and the desperate hope that he could be something other than what the Navy had made him. If he helped Rebecca, that life would be at risk. Castellanos' people would come for him, would threaten Zoe, would drag him back into the world of violence he'd sworn to leave behind. But if he didn't help, Captain Rodriguez's sacrifice, both the one that had saved Ryan's life and the one that had cost Rodriguez his own, would be for nothing. 20 Marines would remain unavenged, and Castellanos would keep selling defective equipment to soldiers who trusted their government to protect them. "If I do this," Ryan said slowly, still staring out the window, "it's not about the debt. It's not about honor or obligation or any of that military brotherhood bullshit. It's about the fact that 20 people died because someone chose profit over principles, and that kind of evil needs to be stopped. You understand the difference?" "I understand you need to tell yourself that," Rebecca said quietly. "I understand you need to believe you're making a choice rather than paying a debt. That's fine. I don't care about your motivations, Ryan. I care about getting justice for my father and making sure Castellanos can't do this to anyone else." Ryan turned to face her. "Ground rules. First, nothing happens without my daughter's safety being absolutely guaranteed. She doesn't know about any of this, and she stays that way. Second, I'm not your employee or your partner. I'm a consultant you happen to hire for security purposes. Everything is documented, legal, and above board. Third, if at any point I decide this is too dangerous, I walk away and you don't contact me again. Those are my terms. Non-negotiable." Rebecca nodded immediately. "Agreed. All of it. What do you need from me?" "Start by telling me everything. Every threat Castellanos has made, every person involved in this case, every piece of evidence you have or plan to gather. Then tell me about your security situation, where you live, what precautions you've taken. Who knows you're pursuing this case? I need the complete picture before I can assess how to keep you alive long enough to testify." For the next 2 hours, Rebecca talked while Ryan listened and took mental notes. The picture she painted was grimmer than he'd hoped. Castellanos Defense Systems was a multi-billion-dollar operation with contracts across 3 continents and political connections that reached into Congress, the Pentagon, and probably the White House. Victor Castellanos himself was a former army officer who'd parlayed his military connections into a defense empire, building his fortune on the premise that security and profit weren't mutually exclusive, except when they were, in which case profit always won. The armor in question, the Centurion Series 3 tactical vest, had been rushed through testing to meet a Pentagon deadline. Internal documents showed that early prototypes had failed ballistic testing repeatedly, but rather than delaying production, Castellanos had simply falsified the test results and bribed the quality control inspectors. The vests had shipped to units across Afghanistan and Iraq, and soldiers had died wearing them, their families told they'd been killed by particularly powerful IEDs or unfortunate angles of attack. Captain Rodriguez had been investigating equipment failures for months before he'd stumbled onto the Centurion data. He'd been careful, building his case quietly, sending encrypted files to his daughter as insurance. But somehow Castellanos had learned about the investigation. The IED that killed Rodriguez and his Marines had been devastatingly effective, yes, but the armor that should have saved at least some of them had failed across the board. 20 men wearing Castellanos equipment, all dead. The odds of that being coincidence were astronomical. The official inquiry ruled it equipment failure due to unforeseen enemy capability, Rebecca said, her voice tight with controlled rage. They blamed the insurgents for being too effective rather than investigating why the armor didn't work. My father's commanding officer tried to push for deeper investigation, but he got transferred to a desk job in Virginia and warned that pursuing the matter would end his career. Cover up from the top, Ryan said. It wasn't a question. He'd seen enough military politics to know how these things worked. When billions of dollars and political reputations were at stake, individual lives became acceptable losses, casualties in a war of budgets and appropriations. So I filed the civil suit, Rebecca continued. Wrongful death, product liability, demanding discovery of all testing records and internal communications. Castellanos tried to get it dismissed on national security grounds, but the judge ruled that civilian court has jurisdiction over contractor liability regardless of military contracts. That's when the threats started. Phone calls at midnight, men following me to work, anonymous letters describing my daily routine in disturbing detail. And then Friday night, when they cornered me in Cedar Falls, thinking a small town would be a safe place to deliver their ultimatum where no one would interfere. Except someone did, Ryan said. Except you did. And now they know about you, which means you're in danger whether you help me or not. At least if you help, we're working together instead of waiting for them to make their move. It was sound logic, and Ryan hated that it was sound. He'd already compromised his anonymity by intervening Friday night. Walking away now wouldn't erase that exposure. It would just mean facing whatever came next without preparation or allies. Where are you staying? Ryan asked. There's a motel outside of town, the Cedar Rest Inn. I checked in under my own name because I didn't think... You need to check out immediately and find somewhere else. Somewhere they won't expect. Do you have friends or family in the area? No one. My mother died when I was 12, and my father was my only family. I have colleagues in Kansas City, but involving them would just put them at risk. Ryan thought quickly, running through options and discarding most of them. Hotels were too public, too easy to monitor. Her apartment in Kansas City was obviously compromised. She needed somewhere secure but not obvious, somewhere Castellanos' people wouldn't think to look. There's a farmhouse, Ryan said slowly, about 40 minutes from here, out past the county line. Belongs to a friend who's overseas on contract work. He lets me use it sometimes when I need space. It's remote, defensible, and not connected to either of us in any obvious way. You can stay there while we figure out next steps. Are you sure? I don't want to impose... You're already imposed, Ryan cut her off. The question is whether we handle this smart or stupid. Staying at a motel under your own name while defense contractor hit squads are looking for you is stupid. The farmhouse is at least smart adjacent. Grab your things from the motel, pay cash, and meet me there in 2 hours. He wrote down the address and directions, then added his phone number. Don't call unless it's an emergency. Don't use your credit cards. Don't tell anyone where you're going. If you see anything suspicious, anyone following you, call me immediately and abort. Find a police station and wait there. Understand? Rebecca took the paper with shaking hands. I understand. And Ryan, thank you. I know you didn't want this, didn't ask for any of this, but thank you. After she left, Ryan stood in his living room surrounded by pictures of his dead wife and thought about promises. About the ones we make and the ones that get made for us by circumstances and debt, and the ghost of a Marine captain who'd pulled a wounded SEAL out of an ambush 8 years ago. He thought about Zoe, about how to explain potential danger without terrifying her, about how to protect her while honoring an obligation he hadn't known he'd been carrying. Finally, he pulled out his phone and made a call he'd hoped never to make again. The voice that answered was rough, aged by hard living and harder choices, but immediately familiar. Carter? That really you? Thought you'd gone full civilian. Hey, Gunderson. Yeah, it's me. I need a favor. Sergeant Major Tom Gunderson had been Ryan's team leader for 3 years, the kind of operator who'd seen every ugly corner of the world and somehow maintained both his sanity and his sense of humor. He'd retired 6 months before Ryan, settling in Montana with his wife and a small ranch, where he raised horses and pretended the nightmares weren't as frequent as they actually were. Must be some favor if you're calling after 3 years of radio silence, Gunderson said. What do you need? Background on Victor Castellanos, Castellanos Defense Systems, everything you can get from your contacts, military, intelligence, anything off the record. There was a long pause. Castellanos? Christ, Carter, what have you gotten yourself into? That man's connected 6 ways to Sunday. Word is he's got people in places you don't even know exist, which is why I need information. Can you help or not? Another pause, then a sigh. Yeah, I can help. Give me 24 hours. But Carter, be careful with this one. Castellanos isn't just another corrupt contractor. He's the corrupt contractor. The one everyone knows about, but no one touches, because touching him means your career ends at best and your body gets found in a ditch at worst. Noted. And Gunderson? Thanks. Don't thank me yet. I haven't told you what this favor's gonna cost. Ryan smiled despite himself. Send me a bill. He ended the call and looked at the clock. 3:15. Zoe would be out of school in 45 minutes. He needed to pick her up, act normal, maintain the carefully constructed routine that kept her world stable and safe. Then tonight, after she was asleep, he'd need to drive out to the farmhouse and make sure Rebecca had arrived safely, that she understood the security protocols, that she wasn't leading Castellanos' people straight to another location that would need defending. His peaceful life had lasted exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. Now it was ending, not with dramatic finality, but with the slow erosion of carefully maintained fiction. Ryan Carter, the plumber, was giving way to Ryan Carter, the SEAL, and the worst part was how natural the transition felt, how easily he slipped back into old patterns of thinking and operating. This was what Sarah had feared, what she'd made him promise to avoid. But Sarah wasn't here, and Captain Rodriguez was dead, and 20 Marines deserved justice even if pursuing it meant breaking promises to ghosts and endangering the careful peace he'd built. Ryan grabbed his keys and headed for Zoe's school, trying to figure out how to explain to an 8-year-old that their quiet life was about to become complicated without explaining any of the details that would terrify her. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe the best he could do was maintain the illusion of normalcy for as long as possible. Let her keep believing the world was safe, and her father was just a plumber who sometimes had to work late. Maybe that was the best any parent could do, protect their children from the truth until the truth became unavoidable, and then protect them from the consequences of that truth with everything you had. As Ryan drove toward Cedar Falls Elementary, past the familiar landmarks of his adopted home, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror and saw both versions of himself looking back, the tired single dad and the combat operator, the man who wanted peace and the man who was catastrophically good at war. Captain Rodriguez had saved his life. Now Rodriguez's daughter needed saving. The debt was clear, the obligation unavoidable. Ryan just hoped that when this was over, if they survived it, there would still be enough of Ryan Carter, the plumber, left to rebuild what Ryan Carter, the SEAL, was about to destroy. 3 years of peace. It had been a good run. Now the war had found him again, dressed in expensive suits and carrying briefcases full of damning evidence and old obligations. And Ryan Carter, despite his best intentions and careful planning and promises to the dead, was going to war one more time. For Captain Benjamin Rodriguez. For 20 dead Marines. For justice that should have been delivered through proper channels but wouldn't be because the system was designed to protect men like Castellanos. And maybe, though he wouldn't admit it even to himself, for the part of him that had never really left the battlefield, that had been sleeping restlessly beneath the surface of ordinary life, waiting for a reason to wake up. That reason had arrived in a silver Lexus, carrying evidence of corruption and asking for help he couldn't refuse. The quiet protector was quiet no longer. In Cedar Falls, Rebecca Martinez and Victor Castellanos were all about to learn exactly what that meant. The farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel road that hadn't seen maintenance in at least 5 years, surrounded by 70 acres of dormant cornfield and the kind of isolation that could be either peaceful or ominous, depending on your state of mind. Ryan pulled up just after 8 that evening, his headlights cutting through darkness so complete it felt like driving into oblivion. Rebecca's Lexus was parked near the barn, already covered with a tarp he'd told her to bring, making it less visible from the air or from anyone who might come looking. He'd left Zoe with Mrs. Henderson, spinning a story about emergency plumbing work in Des Moines that would keep him out late. Zoe had accepted it without question, because that was what 8-year-olds did when their father had never given them reason to doubt, and the trust in her eyes had felt like swallowing glass. Every lie he told her in the name of protection was another brick in a wall he was building between who he was and who she thought he was. The farmhouse belonged to Marcus Webb, a former Delta operator who'd saved Ryan's life in Yemen and who now worked private security contracts in places that pretended to have stable governments. Marcus had given Ryan a key years ago with instructions to use the place whenever he needed space to think or remember or forget, whatever the situation required. The house itself was a two-story structure that had probably been charming in 1970, but now existed in a state of functional decay. Weathered siding, a porch that sagged slightly on the left side, windows that rattled in strong wind but still locked securely. Inside was a different story. Marcus had retrofitted the farmhouse with security that would make a DEA safe house jealous. Reinforced door frames, shatterproof windows, a gun safe in the master bedroom containing enough firepower to outfit a small militia, and a communications setup in the basement that could tap into satellite feeds and encrypted networks. The furniture was minimal and utilitarian, but the bones of the house were solid, defensible, exactly what Rebecca needed while they figured out how to keep her alive long enough to testify. Ryan found her in the kitchen, sitting at a scarred wooden table with her laptop open and files spread around her like a paper fortress. She'd changed from her business suit into jeans and a sweater, her hair down now, making her look younger and more vulnerable without the professional armor. A cup of tea sat cooling at her elbow, untouched, suggesting she'd made it more for the ritual of normalcy than any actual desire to drink it. "You found it okay," Ryan said, announcing his presence before entering fully. In her current state of mind, startling her seemed cruel. Rebecca looked up, relief washing over her features. "Your directions were very precise. Military precision, I suppose." She attempted a smile that didn't quite work. "I've been going through the depositions again, trying to find something we missed, some angle that Castellanos' lawyers haven't already blocked." Ryan pulled out a chair and sat across from her, studying the documents with professional assessment. "Before we get into legal strategy, we need to talk about security protocols. This house is secure, but secure doesn't mean invulnerable. There are rules if you're going to stay here." "I'm listening," Rebecca said, closing her laptop to give him full attention. "First, no phone calls except on the burner I'm going to give you, and only to numbers I've cleared. Your personal phone stays off unless absolutely necessary, and when you do use it, assume everything you say is being monitored. Second, you don't leave this property without me. Not for groceries, not for fresh air, not for any reason. Third, if I tell you to do something in an emergency, you do it immediately without questions or arguments. Those 3 seconds you spend asking why could be the difference between living and dying." Rebecca nodded slowly. "You really think Castellanos would send people here to kill me?" "I think Castellanos has billions of dollars at stake and a history of making problems disappear," Ryan said bluntly. "You're a problem. I'm a problem. The evidence is a problem. Men like him don't solve problems with negotiation and compromise. They solve them with overwhelming force and plausible deniability. So yes, I think he'll send people, and I think there'll be professionals who won't hesitate or announce themselves politely." "That's terrifying." "That's realistic. Terror is what keeps you alert. Complacency is what gets you killed." Rebecca wrapped her hands around her teacup, seeking warmth or comfort from its presence. "How do you live like this? Always thinking about threats and contingencies and who might be trying to kill you. How did you do it for 8 years?" "You compartmentalize," Ryan said. "You put the fear in a box, acknowledge it's there, and then you focus on the mission. The mission is keeping you alive and building a case strong enough to put Castellanos away. Everything else is noise." "And your daughter? How do you compartmentalize her?" The question hit harder than Rebecca probably intended. Ryan was quiet for a moment, thinking about Zoe coloring her dragons at Mrs. Henderson's house, blissfully unaware that her father was sitting in a farmhouse planning how to protect a lawyer from defense contractor assassins. "I don't," he admitted. "Zoe's the one thing I can't put in a box. She's why I left the Navy, why I became a plumber, why I've spent 3 years trying to be normal. And now I'm risking all of that because your father saved my life, and 20 Marines deserve justice. So don't ask me how I live like this, because the truth is I don't. I'm improvising and hoping I can keep all the pieces from falling apart." Rebecca's eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. "I'm sorry. I keep saying that, but I mean it. I'm sorry your life got dragged into this. I'm sorry about your wife, and I'm sorry you have to choose between protecting your daughter and honoring a debt to a dead man who saved you. If there was any other way—" "There isn't," Ryan interrupted. We've established that. So let's stop apologizing and start planning. Tell me about the case. What do you need to win? For the next hour, Rebecca walked him through the legal labyrinth she'd been navigating for 18 months. The civil suit was scheduled for trial in 6 weeks, assuming it made it that far. She had the documents Captain Rodriguez had died protecting, the test results, the emails, the proof that Castellanos had knowingly sold defective armor. But documents alone weren't enough. Castellanos' legal team would argue chain of custody issues, would claim the documents were fabricated or taken out of context, would bury the truth under enough technical jargon and expert testimony that a jury's eyes would glaze over. What Rebecca needed was a witness, someone from inside Castellanos' defense systems who could testify to the systematic fraud, who could connect the dots between the falsified tests and the dead soldiers. She'd had 3 potential witnesses, engineers who'd worked on the Centurion project and were willing to testify. 2 had recanted after receiving threats. The 3rd had died in a car accident that was ruled mechanical failure, but had happened 2 days after he'd given a deposition. So we need a new witness, Ryan said. Someone Castellanos can't intimidate or eliminate. Someone with credibility and evidence. And where do we find this mythical person? Rebecca asked with bitter humor. Everyone who worked on the project is either loyal to Castellanos or too terrified to speak. I've contacted dozens of former employees. They either hang up immediately or tell me they signed NDAs that would destroy them financially if they violated. Ryan thought about it, his mind working through the problem with tactical precision. What about the quality control inspectors, the ones Castellanos bribed to pass the defective armor? I've tried. They claim they followed proper procedures and any failures were within acceptable margins. They're not going to admit to taking bribes. Not voluntarily, Ryan agreed, but people have breaking points. Everyone does. We just need to find the right pressure to apply. Rebecca looked uncomfortable. I'm a lawyer, Ryan. I can't be part of witness intimidation or illegal coercion. There are ethical boundaries I can't cross. Then don't cross them, Ryan said simply. You focus on the legal case, building arguments and filing motions and doing whatever lawyers do. Let me worry about finding the witness. What I need from you is names. Everyone who was involved in the testing process. Everyone who knew the armor was defective. Everyone who had something to gain or lose from the cover-up. That's a long list. Start with the top 3, the ones most likely to break if pushed correctly. Rebecca pulled up a file on her laptop, scrolling through names and positions. Daniel Morrison, lead quality control inspector for the Pentagon contract. He signed off on all the testing reports despite the failures. Thomas Chen, project manager for the Centurion series. He would have known every detail of the development process. And Sarah Vance, Castellanos' former executive assistant. She was fired 6 months ago after she started asking questions about discrepancies in the documentation. Ryan's attention sharpened at the last name. The assistant was fired for asking questions. That's interesting. Why fire her instead of paying her off or intimidating her into silence? I don't know, Rebecca admitted. I tried to contact her for a deposition, but she refused to meet with me, said she'd signed an NDA and couldn't discuss anything related to her employment. Where is she now? Des Moines, working as a paralegal at a small firm. She's got a mortgage, student loans, 2 kids in middle school, typical middle-class struggles. Ryan filed the information away. Sarah Vance sounded like the weak link in Castellanos' wall of silence, someone with potential knowledge, recent employment, and financial pressures that might override fear if approached correctly. Not through legal channels that could be blocked by NDAs and corporate lawyers, but through the kind of quiet conversation that happened in parking lots and coffee shops, where the choice was presented not as testimony versus silence, but as complicity versus conscience. I'll start with Vance, Ryan said. In the meantime, you need to prepare for the possibility that we don't find a witness, that this goes to trial with just the documents. Can you win that way? Rebecca's expression was uncertain. Maybe. Probably not. Castellanos' lawyers are the best money can buy, and they've been preparing for this for 18 months. Without testimony to humanize the evidence, to explain what these documents mean in real terms, a jury might not understand the significance. They'll see technical data and bureaucratic emails, not 20 dead Marines and a systematic cover-up. Then we find a witness, Ryan said with finality. One way or another. They worked through the night, Ryan learning the details of the case while Rebecca walked him through depositions and evidence and the Byzantine world of military procurement fraud. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, exhaustion finally caught up with Rebecca, and she dozed off at the table, her head pillowed on her arms, surrounded by the documents that had consumed her life for 18 months. Ryan covered her with a blanket from the couch and moved to the window, staring out at darkness punctuated only by distant stars. The isolation that had seemed peaceful when he'd arrived now felt tactical. No approaching headlights would go unnoticed. No footsteps would approach unheard. This was what his life had become again, standing watch while civilians slept, calculating fields of fire and escape routes, preparing for violence that might never come, but probably would. His phone buzzed. A text from Gunderson. Found some interesting intel on your boy Castellanos. Not suitable for text. Call when you can. And Carter? Be very fucking careful with this one. Ryan stepped outside onto the porch, letting the November cold shock him fully awake, and dialed. Gunderson answered on the first ring despite the hour, suggesting he'd been waiting. Tell me, Ryan said without preamble. Victor Castellanos is bad news in ways you probably haven't imagined, Gunderson began. He's got connections to black budget programs, off-the-books operations, the kind of shit that doesn't officially exist. Word from my contacts is that he's not just a defense contractor, he's an information broker. He sells equipment to the military, sure, but he also sells intelligence to anyone willing to pay. Foreign governments, private military companies, people you don't want having detailed information about U.S. operations. He's a traitor, Ryan said flatly. He's worse than a traitor. A traitor sells secrets for ideology or revenge. Castellanos sells them for profit, and he does it with enough plausible deniability that no one can touch him. The defective armor? That's almost secondary to his real crimes. But it's the only thing anyone can potentially prove in open court, which is why he's so determined to bury it. What about the Kandahar incident, Captain Rodriguez and his Marines? There was a long pause. When Gunderson spoke again, his voice was harder. Off the record, from someone who was read into the classified investigation, the IED shouldn't have been lethal. The armor failed, yes, but there's speculation it failed because it was designed to fail. That batch of Centurion vests was supposed to go to a Syrian rebel group through back channels. Somehow they got rerouted to Rodriguez's unit instead. Ryan felt ice form in his stomach. You're saying those Marines were killed by friendly equipment intentionally sabotaged for sale to enemies? I'm saying the investigation was shut down before anyone could prove it, but the people who looked into it came away convinced. Castellanos was selling to multiple sides, and he didn't much care if the occasional batch ended up with the wrong buyer. Those 20 Marines were collateral damage in his profit margins. Jesus Christ. Yeah. So when I tell you to be careful, I mean it. This isn't just corporate malfeasance, Carter. This is someone who's willing to get American soldiers killed for money and who has enough power to cover it up. If he finds out you're helping the lawyer going after him, you're not just going to face legal problems. You're going to face the kind of problems that get solved with bullets and bodies that never get found. Ryan absorbed this, his mind racing through implications and complications. If Gunderson's intel was accurate, then Rebecca's case was both more important and more dangerous than either of them had realized. Proving Castellanos had sold defective armor could open the door to investigations into his other activities, could unravel an entire network of corruption and treason that reached into the highest levels of defense and intelligence. It could also get everyone involved killed very efficiently by people who specialized in making problems disappear. I need a favor, Ryan said. Actually, several favors. First, I need background on 3 people: Daniel Morrison, Thomas Chen, and Sarah Vance. Everything you can find, especially financial pressure points and personal vulnerabilities. Second, I need to know if Castellanos has a team actively hunting for Rebecca Martinez and where they might be operating. Third, I need options for getting evidence to people who can actually do something with it if this goes sideways. That's not favors, that's a full operational workup, Gunderson said, but his tone suggested he'd expected something like this. Give me 48 hours on the background checks. As for Castellanos' team, I'll ask around, but Carter? If he's got professionals looking for your lawyer, you won't know they're there until they make their move. These aren't the thugs from Romano's. These will be contractors who know what they're doing. Noted. What about the evidence? I'll put you in touch with someone at DoD Inspector General's office, someone I trust who can't be bought. But understand, military justice moves slowly, and Castellanos has had years to build his defenses. Even with solid evidence, this could take months or years to prosecute, and that's assuming the case doesn't get buried for national security reasons. The lawyer's filing civil suit in 6 weeks. That's our timeline. Gunderson laughed without humor. Then you better hope her evidence is airtight and her witness list is willing to testify, because 6 weeks isn't enough time to build a federal case against someone this connected. You're looking at playing defense, keeping her alive until trial, and hoping civilian court can accomplish what military justice couldn't. That's the plan. That's a shit plan, but I've seen you work miracles with less. I'll get you what I can. And Carter, if this goes bad, if you need extraction or support, call me. I'm 3 states away, but I can be there with friends in 12 hours. Don't try to be a hero alone. Haven't been a hero in 3 years, Ryan said. Just a plumber trying to pay an old debt. Plumbers don't usually need intel on defense contractors and advice on countering professional hit teams. Face it, brother, you're back in the game whether you wanted to be or not. Might as well play to win. After ending the call, Ryan stayed on the porch for another 20 minutes, letting the cold soak into his bones while he thought about choices and consequences and the narrow path he was trying to walk between protecting his daughter and honoring Captain Rodriguez's sacrifice. Every decision he made now rippled outward in ways he couldn't fully predict. Helping Rebecca could expose Zoe to danger. Walking away could doom Rebecca and let Castellanos continue selling defective equipment that would kill more soldiers. There was no good answer, just degrees of bad that had to be weighed and measured and chosen with incomplete information and too little time. Eventually, the cold drove him back inside. Rebecca was still asleep at the table, her face peaceful in a way it probably wasn't when she was awake. Ryan envied that kind of sleep, the kind that came without nightmares or the constant awareness of potential threats. He'd lost that ability years ago, somewhere between his 3rd deployment and the moment Sarah had told him about the diagnosis, and he didn't expect to ever get it back. He spent the rest of the night conducting a security sweep of the property, checking perimeter fences and sight lines, identifying potential approach routes and defensive positions. The farmhouse was situated on a slight rise with good visibility in 3 directions, the 4th direction blocked by the barn and a line of trees that would funnel any approach into a predictable pattern. The gun safe in the master bedroom contained 2 AR-15s, a Remington 870 shotgun, 3 handguns in various calibers, and enough ammunition to hold off a small army assuming they were stupid enough to make a frontal assault. More likely, any professionals Castellanos sent would use subtlety. A gas leak, a car accident, something that looked natural enough to avoid investigation. That's what Ryan would do in their position. But being aware of that was half the battle. The other half was staying alert, maintaining security protocols, and making sure Rebecca understood that her life depended on constant vigilance. Dawn broke cold and gray, November asserting itself with the kind of overcast that promised rain or snow, depending on the temperature drop. Ryan made coffee in the farmhouse's ancient percolator and was drinking his 2nd cup when Rebecca emerged from the kitchen, her hair disheveled and her eyes still puffy with sleep. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, noticing he was wearing the same clothes from the previous evening. "Enough," Ryan lied. "There's coffee if you want it, and some eggs in the fridge if you're hungry." Rebecca poured herself coffee and stood at the counter, studying him with the careful assessment lawyers develop. "You look like you're preparing for war." "I'm preparing for the possibility of war. There's a difference." "Is there?" "From where I'm standing, you've already committed. You've hidden me in a secure location, you're gathering intelligence on potential witnesses. You're running security sweeps of the property. That's not preparation. That's engagement." Ryan couldn't argue with her logic. "Your father saved my life. I'm returning the favor by keeping you alive. After the trial, assuming we get there, we're even, and you go back to Kansas City, and I go back to being a plumber. That's the deal." "You keep saying that like you believe it," Rebecca said gently, "like this is a transaction that ends neatly once the debt is paid. But I don't think you believe that any more than I do." "What I believe doesn't matter. What matters is building your case and keeping both of us breathing long enough to present it. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, then asked the question Ryan had been dreading. What about your daughter? What did you tell her about where you are? I told her I have emergency work in Des Moines. She's staying with a neighbor until I get back. And when this takes longer than a night or two, when it stretches into days or weeks, then I figure something out, Ryan said more harshly than intended. I've been parenting alone for 3 years. I know how to handle logistics. I'm not questioning your parenting. I'm questioning whether you've thought through what happens if Castellanos' people track you down, if they figure out you have a daughter and decide she's leverage worth pursuing. Have you prepared for that possibility? The question made Ryan's blood run cold because he had thought about it, had spent half the night thinking about it, and had no good answer. Castellanos doesn't know about Zoe. There's no reason for him to know. I'm just some civilian who interfered in his business. As long as we keep it that way, she's safe. Except Cedar Falls is a small town where everyone knows everyone, and by now the story of what you did at Romano's has probably spread. Someone mentions it online, someone posts about it on social media, and suddenly Castellanos' intelligence network has a data point to investigate. How long before they figure out the helpful plumber has an 8-year-old daughter who goes to Cedar Falls Elementary? Ryan's hands tightened around his coffee cup. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we need a plan that includes protecting your daughter, not just hoping she stays off Castellanos' radar. Because hope isn't a strategy, and pretending she's safe because you want her to be safe isn't going to keep her that way if the situation deteriorates. The brutal honesty cut deep because it was right. Ryan had been compartmentalizing Zoe, keeping her in a separate mental category from the threat assessment and tactical planning, as if his desire to keep her out of this would be enough to actually keep her out of this. But Rebecca was correct. In the modern age of social media and data mining and comprehensive background checks, anonymity was an illusion. If Castellanos wanted to find out about Ryan Carter's vulnerabilities, he'd find out about Zoe eventually. What do you suggest? Ryan asked quietly. Get her out of Cedar Falls. Send her somewhere safe, somewhere Castellanos can't find her, with someone you trust absolutely. Then we proceed without worrying that every move we make is potentially exposing her to danger. The thought of sending Zoe away, of not seeing her for however long this took, felt like a knife between his ribs. She was the only good thing left from his life with Sarah. The only reason he got up in the morning and tried to be better than what the Navy had made him. But keeping her close while defending Rebecca from defense contractor assassins was the opposite of protecting her. It was putting her in harm's way while pretending otherwise. I'll make arrangements, Ryan said finally, but it'll take a day or two. I need to find someone who can take her, someone outside the normal circles who won't ask too many questions. What about your SEAL contacts, someone from your old unit? Ryan shook his head. Most of them are either still active duty or working contracts overseas. The few who are stateside have their own families and problems. I can't ask them to take on this kind of risk. Then who? He thought about it, running through his limited options. Sarah's family had largely disappeared after her death, unable to handle their grief except through distance. His own parents were gone, his father from a heart attack 10 years ago, and his mother from Alzheimer's 3 years before that. He had acquaintances in Cedar Falls, but no one he trusted with this kind of secret, no one who wouldn't ask questions he couldn't answer. Then he remembered Marcus Webb's ranch in Montana. Marcus, who owned this farmhouse, who understood operational security, who told Ryan years ago that if he ever needed anything at all, the door was open. Marcus was currently in Afghanistan, but his wife Ellen ran the ranch and had raised 3 kids who were now adults scattered across the country. She was tough, competent, and used to her husband's work bringing complications into their lives. I might have someone, Ryan said slowly. A friend's wife in Montana. She's military adjacent, understands the need for discretion. If I explain the situation, she might be willing to take Zoe for a few weeks. Can you trust her? With my life, which is what I'd be doing, trusting her with the most important part of it. Rebecca nodded. Then make the call. The sooner Zoe is safe, the sooner we can focus entirely on building the case without divided attention. Ryan pulled out his phone, hesitated for a moment while he tried to figure out how to explain this situation without explaining it, then dialed Ellen Webb's number. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice carrying the warm Wyoming drawl that reminded Ryan of better times when the worst thing he had to worry about was Marcus's terrible jokes during downtime. "Ryan Carter, as I live and breathe," Ellen said cheerfully. "Haven't heard from you in what, 2 years? You finally coming to visit like you promised?" "Hey, Ellen, is this a good time to talk?" Her tone shifted immediately. That ability military spouses develop to read subtext and know when casual conversation is actually something serious. "For you, always. What do you need?" "I need to ask a favor that's going to sound crazy, and I can't give you all the details about why, but I need someone to take care of my daughter for a few weeks, somewhere safe and quiet, and I need it to happen without a lot of questions or paperwork or official channels." There was a pause. "How much trouble are you in?" "I'm not in trouble. I'm helping someone who is, and I need to make sure Zoe stays out of the crossfire while I do it." Crossfire is an interesting word choice. We talking legal crossfire or the other kind? Hopefully the first, possibly the second. I can't say more than that. Ellen was quiet for a long moment, and Ryan could almost hear her thinking, weighing the request against her obligations and her friendship and the code that people like her lived by. "Marcus always said you were one of the good ones, that if you were asking for help, it was because someone needed it. That's still true?" "Yes." "Then send her out. I'll pick her up at Billings Airport whenever you can get her there. She likes horses?" Relief flooded through Ryan so intensely it was almost painful. "She loves horses. Ellen, I can't thank you enough. If there was any other way, there probably isn't, or you wouldn't be calling. Just promise me you're being careful, that whatever you're mixed up in is worth the risk." Ryan glanced at Rebecca, who was watching him with cautious hope. 20 dead Marines. Captain Rodriguez dying to expose corruption. A lawyer risking everything for justice her father had paid for with his life. "It's worth it," he said with certainty. "Then that's good enough for me. I'll expect her within 48 hours. And Ryan, stay alive. Zoe needs her father, and the world needs more good men willing to do hard things." After ending the call, Ryan felt some of the weight lift from his shoulders. Zoe would be safe in Montana with Ellen, far from Cedar Falls and Castellanos' reach. He'd still have to explain it to her somehow, still have to find words that would make sense to an 8-year-old without terrifying her, but at least he had a destination and a deadline. "Thank you," Rebecca said quietly. "I know that wasn't easy." "Nothing about this is easy," Ryan replied. "But you were right. Better to send her away now than wait for Castellanos to find out about her and use her as leverage." The rest of the morning was spent planning. Ryan would return to Cedar Falls, pack Zoe's things, and drive her to the airport in Des Moines for a flight to Billings. The story would be that she was visiting a friend of her mother's, a little vacation before winter really set in. Zoe would probably accept it without too many questions because that's what kids did when their parents presented something as decided fact. Meanwhile, Rebecca would stay at the farmhouse, continuing to prepare for trial, organizing evidence and building arguments while Ryan worked on finding a witness willing to testify. It wasn't a perfect plan. Perfect would be Rebecca in witness protection and Ryan back to his quiet life with Zoe safe in Cedar Falls, but it was the best they could manage with limited time and resources. As Ryan prepared to leave, Rebecca caught his arm. "Before you go, there's something you should see. Something I haven't shown anyone else because I wasn't sure it was relevant. But after everything you've told me, after what your contact said about Castellanos being an information broker," she pulled out a slim envelope from her briefcase, the kind of security envelope that requires you to tear it open. Inside were 3 photographs, grainy surveillance-style images that looked like they'd been taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. The first showed Victor Castellanos meeting with a man in a restaurant, their body language suggesting serious discussion. The second was a close-up of documents being exchanged. The third was the other man's face, caught in profile as he stood to leave. Ryan stared at the third photograph, recognition hitting him like physical impact. "Where did you get this?" "My father sent them 2 days before he died. The envelope arrived the day after his funeral. I didn't know what to make of them. I didn't recognize the other man, didn't know if they were relevant to the armor case or something else entirely. But I kept them because they seemed important." "They're important," Ryan said, his voice tight. "That's General Marcus Hawthorne. He was the procurement officer who approved the Centurion contract over objections from his own quality control staff. His signature is on every document that pushed that armor into production despite the test failures. So Castellanos had the general in his pocket? Looks like it, which explains how the armor got approved so quickly, why objections were overruled, why the investigation into the Kandahar incident was shut down. Hawthorne is retired now, working as a consultant for defense companies, but while he was active duty, he had oversight authority for billions in contracts. If Castellanos was bribing him or had some kind of leverage, then we can prove corruption at the highest levels, Rebecca finished. Not just defective armor, but systematic fraud involving military leadership. Ryan studied the photographs, his mind working through implications. This changes things. If we can prove Hawthorne was involved, that he approved equipment he knew was defective in exchange for payoffs, that's a criminal conspiracy that reaches beyond Castellanos. The DoD would have to investigate. The case becomes too big to bury. Can we prove it? Having photographs of them meeting isn't the same as proving bribery. No, but it's a starting point. If we can find evidence of money transfers, offshore accounts, anything that connects Hawthorne to Castellanos financially, we can build a case that your father's documents support rather than standing alone. Rebecca's eyes brightened with something that might have been hope. So we need financial records, bank statements, wire transfers, anything that shows money flowing from Castellanos to Hawthorne, which requires someone with access to those records or the technical skills to get them. Hacking, that's illegal. Anything we obtain that way would be inadmissible. Ryan smiled without humor. Inadmissible in court doesn't mean useless for investigation. We get the records illegally, we use them to figure out where the money went, and then we find legal ways to subpoena that information. It's called parallel construction. Intelligence agencies do it all the time. And do you know someone who can hack into Castellanos' financial records? I know someone who knows someone, but it'll take time and money, neither of which we have in abundance. Rebecca pulled out her checkbook. How much? More than you can afford unless you're independently wealthy. My father had a life insurance policy, $500,000 that I haven't touched because spending it felt like accepting he was really gone. If that money can help prove he died trying to expose corruption, if it can bring down the man who killed him, then that's exactly what it should be used for. Ryan wanted to argue, to tell her to save the money for something more certain than hiring hackers to chase financial records that might not exist. But the determination in her eyes, the need to make her father's death mean something beyond tragedy, was too familiar. He'd felt the same way after Sarah died, the desperate need to believe her suffering had purpose, that the 18 months of watching her fade had taught him something or made him better or somehow justified the cosmic injustice of cancer taking a woman who'd never hurt anyone. I'll make some calls, Ryan said. No promises, but I'll see what's possible. That's all I'm asking. Possibility. A chance to make this right. Ryan left the farmhouse as afternoon shadows lengthened across frozen fields, his mind already working through the logistics of what came next. Get Zoe to Montana by tomorrow night. Contact Gunderson's people about hacking Castellanos' finances. Follow up on Sarah Vance, the fired executive assistant who might know where bodies were buried. Build a case strong enough to survive courtroom warfare against the best lawyers money could buy. And somehow do all of it while keeping himself and Rebecca alive against professionals who specialized in making problems disappear quietly and permanently. It was impossible. It was also necessary. And Ryan Carter had built a career on doing impossible things because they were necessary, because someone had to stand between the monsters and the innocent, because walking away wasn't an option when the stakes were measured in lives and justice. He drove back towards Cedar Falls as the sun broke through clouds in that particular November way that makes everything look simultaneously beautiful and dying. And he thought about Zoe, about the conversation they'd have to have tonight, about how to explain that Daddy needs her to go away for a while without explaining why, how to make it sound like an adventure instead of evacuation, how to be the father she deserved while being the operator circumstances required. Sarah would have known what to say. Sarah always knew what to say, how to make hard things bearable and scary things manageable. But Sarah was 3 years gone, and Ryan was improvising parenthood the way he improvised everything else, with good intentions and imperfect execution, and the hope that love would cover the gaps. His phone rang. An unknown number. Ryan answered cautiously. Yes? Mr. Carter? An unfamiliar voice, male, professional. I represent Victor Castellanos. He'd like to meet with you to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. Tonight, if possible. Just a conversation between reasonable men. Every instinct Ryan possessed screamed trap, but his voice stayed level. How did you get this number? Mr. Castellanos has extensive resources. The number wasn't difficult to obtain. Neither was information about your daughter, your home address, your daily routine. We know quite a lot about you, Mr. Carter, which is why Mr. Castellanos believes a conversation would be in everyone's best interest. The implied threat about Zoe made Ryan's vision narrow with controlled rage. I'm not interested in meeting with Castellanos. Perhaps you should be. He's prepared to offer significant compensation for your cooperation, enough to ensure your daughter's future, her education, whatever she might need. All he asks in return is that you cease involving yourself in matters that don't concern you. Tell Castellanos that the matters very much concern me, and that I don't negotiate with people who threaten children. No one is threatening anyone, Mr. Carter. We're simply having a conversation about options. You have until midnight to consider Mr. Castellanos' offer. After that, the situation becomes less flexible. I'm sure you understand. The line went dead before Ryan could respond. He pulled over to the side of the road, his hands shaking not with fear, but with fury. They knew about Zoe. They'd found her already, faster than he'd anticipated, and they were using her as leverage before the real fight had even begun. This was what Rebecca had warned him about, what Gunderson had warned him about. Castellanos played for keeps, and he played with resources that made normal security precautions look like children's games. The timeline had just accelerated dramatically. Zoe needed to be on a plane to Montana tonight, not tomorrow, and Ryan needed to make it absolutely clear to Castellanos that threatening his daughter was a line that, once crossed, would have permanent consequences. He called Ellen Webb back. Change of plans. I need to get Zoe out tonight. Can you arrange pickup from Billings in the next 6 hours? Consider it done, Ellen said without hesitation. Send me the flight details. Next, he called Mrs. Henderson. I need to pick up Zoe immediately. Emergency. I'll explain later. She's right here, dear, playing with my cats. I'll have her ready. Finally, he called Gunderson. They found out about my daughter. They're using her as leverage. I need options for making this stop, permanently if necessary. How permanent are we talking? Ryan thought about Zoe coloring dragons, about Sarah's deathbed promise, about Captain Rodriguez dying to expose corruption. He thought about 20 Marines killed by defective armor and an 8-year-old girl who deserved to grow up safe and innocent. However permanent it needs to be, Ryan said quietly. I tried to do this the right way, tried to just help Rebecca build her case and walk away clean. But if Castellanos wants to make this personal, if he wants to threaten my daughter, then we'll make it very personal, and he'll discover that some debts get paid in blood. Gunderson was quiet for a moment. You sure about this, Carter? Once you go down that road, there's no coming back. You'll be what you were, not what you've been trying to be. I'm sure. My daughter's safety isn't negotiable. Send me everything you have on Castellanos, where he lives, how he moves, who protects him. If he wants to play hardball, I'll show him what hardball actually looks like. I'll have it to you by tonight. And Carter, for what it's worth, I think you're making the right call. Some people only understand one language, and it sounds like Castellanos is one of them. Ryan ended the call and sat in his truck on the side of the road, watching November afternoon fade toward evening, making peace with what he was about to become again. The quiet protector was done being quiet. The debt to Captain Rodriguez had just become personal in ways that transcended obligation or honor. Victor Castellanos had made a fatal mistake. He'd threatened Ryan Carter's daughter. And now Ryan Carter was going to remind him why Navy SEALs were the ones you sent when failure wasn't an option and mercy wasn't on the table. The war had begun in earnest. And this time, Ryan wasn't fighting to protect a stranger or honor a debt. He was fighting for Zoe, for the life he'd built, for the future he'd promised Sarah he'd give their daughter. That was a fight he would win. Whatever it cost, however dark the path became, he would win because losing wasn't an option when his daughter's life hung in the balance. The reckoning of oaths had arrived, and Victor Castellanos was about to learn what happened when you pushed a former SEAL past the point of negotiation into the territory of pure, focused retribution. Ryan's hands were steady as he packed Zoe's suitcase that evening, folding her favorite clothes with the mechanical precision of someone operating on autopilot while their mind worked through tactical calculations. The pink unicorn pajamas Sarah had bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. The rainbow sweater that was getting too small, but that Zoe refused to give up. The stuffed elephant named Mr. Tumbles that had been her constant companion since she was 3. Each item felt weighted with significance, physical evidence of the childhood he was disrupting to keep her safe. Zoe sat on her bed watching him with the careful awareness children develop when they sense something is wrong but don't have the vocabulary to articulate it. "Daddy, why do I have to go to Montana tonight? You said we could go trick-or-treating at the Hendersons' harvest party this weekend." Ryan paused, a pair of jeans in his hands, and tried to find words that would be honest without being terrifying. "Something came up with work, sweetheart. Important work that's going to take me away for a while. And I thought it would be more fun for you to stay with Miss Ellen on her ranch instead of staying with neighbors here while I'm gone." "What kind of work? You're a plumber. Plumbers don't usually go away." The question was innocent, but it cut deep because it forced Ryan to choose between the comfortable lie and a truth he'd spent 3 years hiding. "You remember how I told you Daddy used to be in the Navy before you were born?" Zoe nodded slowly, her eyes widening slightly. She'd seen his Navy portrait in the hallway, the one Sarah had insisted on keeping despite Ryan's discomfort with it. Young Lieutenant Carter in his dress whites, face unlined by grief or nightmares, looking like someone who believed the world could be saved through sufficient application of force and discipline. "Well, sometimes people from my Navy days need help with things that are complicated and important, and right now someone needs that kind of help. But it means I have to focus completely on helping them, and I can't do that if I'm worried about you being safe here." "Am I not safe here?" Zoe's voice had gotten smaller, fear creeping in around the edges. Ryan abandoned the packing and sat beside her on the bed, pulling her into his lap the way he used to when she was smaller and the world could be fixed with hugs and reassurance. "You're safe right now because I'm making sure you're safe. But the people I'm helping, they have some bad people angry at them. And those bad people might try to use you to hurt me, to make me stop helping. So I'm sending you somewhere those bad people can't find you, somewhere you can ride horses and have adventures while Daddy takes care of the problem. Does that make sense?" Zoe was quiet for a long moment, processing information that was too adult for 8 years old, but that she was trying to understand anyway. "Is this like Romano's? When those men were hurting the nice lady and you stopped them?" "It's connected to that, yes." "And now they want to hurt me because you helped her?" The way she said it, with such simple clarity, made Ryan's chest tighten. "They want to scare me, but I'm not going to let them, and I'm not going to let them anywhere near you. That's why you're going to Montana, to Miss Ellen's ranch where there are horses and mountains and so much space that bad people would never find you, even if they tried. Will you come get me when it's over, when the bad people are gone?" "The very second it's safe, baby, I promise. And we can video chat every day if you want, so you can tell me about the horses and show me your drawings. It'll be like I'm right there with you." Zoe wrapped her arms around his neck, squeezing tight enough that Ryan could feel her fear transmitted through desperate strength. "I don't want you to get hurt, Daddy. I already lost Mommy. I can't lose you too." The words broke something in Ryan that had been carefully held together with duty and determination. He held his daughter close, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, feeling the fragile trust of her arms around him, and made a silent promise to Sarah's memory that he would come back, that Zoe would not be orphaned by his choices. "You're not going to lose me," he said with absolute certainty. "I'm very good at not getting hurt. Remember? Navy training. I'm practically invincible." Zoe pulled back slightly to look at him with solemn eyes. "That's not true. Nobody's invincible. Mrs. Patterson says God protects fools and children, but everyone else has to be careful." "Mrs. Patterson is wise," Ryan agreed. "And I promise to be very, very careful. Now help me pick which stuffed animals you want to bring, because we can't bring all of them, but we can definitely bring your favorites." They finished packing together, Zoe's running commentary about which animals would be brave enough for Montana adventure, providing a soundtrack of normalcy to the surreal process of evacuating his daughter from her home because defense contractors had made implicit threats about her safety. Ryan moved through the familiar rituals of parenting, finding the right shoes, locating her favorite hairbrush, making sure she had her allergy medication, while his mind simultaneously tracked the timeline to the airport and calculated response scenarios if Castellanos' people tried to intercept them. The drive to Des Moines took 2 hours through November darkness, Zoe dozing in the back seat, while Ryan's eyes constantly checked mirrors for following vehicles. He'd chosen back roads over the highway, routes that would reveal surveillance and provide options for evasive action if necessary. His phone sat on the passenger seat with Gunderson's intelligence file open, photographs and addresses, and personal details about Victor Castellanos illuminated by dashboard light. Castellanos lived in a gated estate outside Kansas City, protected by private security that included former military and law enforcement personnel. He traveled with bodyguards, varied his routes and schedules, employed the kind of security protocols that made casual approach impossible. Taking action against him directly would require extensive planning and resources Ryan didn't have. But there were other options, other pressure points that didn't involve direct confrontation. The file included information about Daniel Morrison, the quality control inspector who'd signed off on the defective armor. Morrison lived alone in a suburb of St. Louis, drank too much according to his social media posts, and had mounting credit card debt that suggested financial problems. A man under pressure, potentially vulnerable to the right approach. Thomas Chen, the project manager, was harder to profile. He'd left Castellanos' defense system 6 months after the Kandahar incident, taking a position with a competing contractor in California. Clean record, stable marriage, no obvious vulnerabilities. But the timing of his departure, right after the investigation was shut down, suggested he might know things worth knowing, and Sarah Vance, the executive assistant, fired for asking questions. She was the wild card, the person closest to Castellanos who'd been pushed out rather than silenced through money or threats. If anyone knew where the bodies were buried, it would be someone who'd spent years managing Castellanos' schedule and correspondence. Ryan's phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. Heard from Gunderson. He's sending someone to help with electronic surveillance. Should arrive at the farmhouse tomorrow. Also wanted you to know I contacted a former colleague at DOJ. If we can get solid evidence linking Hawthorne to Castellanos, she can fast-track an investigation. Progress. Small steps toward building a case that could survive the legal warfare Castellanos would deploy, but progress that felt agonizingly slow when measured against the midnight deadline that had been implied in the earlier phone call. Des Moines Airport glowed against the darkness like a beacon of modern efficiency, all glass and steel and the controlled chaos of people in transit. Ryan parked in short-term parking and gently woke Zoe, helping her out of the truck and shouldering her small suitcase while she rubbed sleep from her eyes. "Are we really doing this?" she asked, her voice small in the cavernous parking structure. "We're really doing this," Ryan confirmed. "But it's going to be an adventure, remember? Miss Ellen has 3 horses, 2 dogs, and about 1,000,000 stars you can see at night because there's no city lights. You're going to have the best time." They made their way through security, Ryan's military ID smoothing the process, and reached the gate for the flight to Billings with 30 minutes to spare. Zoe sat beside him, Mr. Tumbles clutched in her lap, watching the airplanes through the floor-to-ceiling windows with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Daddy," she said suddenly, "when you help people like you helped the nice lady at Romano's, does that make you a hero?" Ryan considered the question carefully. "I think it makes me someone who can't walk away when people need help. I'm not sure that's the same as being a hero." Mrs. Henderson says heroes are people who do the right thing even when it's scary. You do the right thing even when it's scary. Sometimes the right thing is scary, Ryan agreed, but that doesn't mean we don't do it. That's what your mom taught me. She was braver than I ever was, fighting her sickness for as long as she did so she could have more time with us. That's real courage, not the kind you see in movies, but the kind that gets up every day and keeps going even when everything hurts. Zoe was quiet, absorbing this. Then she said, "I wish Mommy was here." "Me too, baby. Every single day." The boarding call came too soon and not soon enough. Ryan walked Zoe to the gate agent, explaining that she was an unaccompanied minor traveling to stay with family friends. The agent was kind and professional, assuring Ryan that Zoe would be well looked after during the flight and personally handed off to Ellen at the Billings airport. The final hug lasted longer than it should have. Zoe clung to him like she used to as a toddler, when every goodbye was a tragedy and every reunion a miracle. "I love you, Daddy. Come back safe." "I love you more than the whole sky," Ryan replied, their ritual phrase from 1,000 bedtimes. "Be good for Miss Ellen, and I'll see you very soon." He watched her walk down the jetway, her small figure made smaller by distance and perspective, until she disappeared around the corner toward the plane. Then he stood at the window and watched the aircraft push back from the gate, taxi toward the runway, and finally lift into the night sky, carrying the most precious thing in his world away to safety. Only when the plane's lights had disappeared into the darkness did Ryan allow himself to breathe fully. Zoe was safe. Whatever happened next, whatever violence or consequences followed, his daughter was out of reach. That was worth any price he'd have to pay. His phone rang as he walked back through the terminal. Unknown number again, but different from the earlier call. Ryan answered. "Yes?" "Mr. Carter, my name is Lawrence Brennan. I'm Victor Castellanos' personal attorney. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. Castellanos was extremely displeased by your refusal to meet with him this evening. He's asked me to make his position absolutely clear." "I'm listening," Ryan said, his voice flat. "Mr. Castellanos has invested significant resources in resolving the unfortunate situation regarding Miss Martinez's lawsuit. He views your involvement as an unwelcome complication. However, he's a reasonable man willing to compensate you generously for ceasing your association with Ms. Martinez. $1 million transferred to any account you specify in exchange for a simple agreement to mind your own business." "And if I refuse?" "Then Mr. Castellanos will be forced to pursue other options. Options that might include sharing certain information about your military service with local authorities, information about operations that were never officially sanctioned, casualties that were never officially recorded. I'm sure you understand the potential legal complications such revelations might create." The threat was sophisticated, targeting Ryan's sealed service record and implying knowledge of classified operations that could be twisted into criminal charges if presented correctly. Someone had been digging deep into his background, deep enough to find classified material that should have been buried beyond reach. "Let me make something absolutely clear to you and to Castellanos," Ryan said, his voice carrying the kind of cold precision that made experienced soldiers reconsider their career choices. "I don't respond to threats, and I don't negotiate with people who threaten children. Your employer made a critical mistake when he brought my daughter into this. That mistake is going to cost him everything he values. Mr. Carter, I strongly advise against—" "I'm not finished," Ryan interrupted. "You tell Castellanos that he has one opportunity to make this right. He drops all threats against Rebecca Martinez, he cooperates fully with her civil suit, and he turns over every piece of evidence regarding the defective armor that killed 20 Marines. In exchange, I might consider not spending the rest of my life systematically destroying everything he's built. That's hardly a reasonable negotiating position." "I'm not negotiating, I'm delivering a promise. Castellanos has until the trial date to comply. If he doesn't, if he continues to threaten Ms. Martinez or attempts to interfere with her case in any way, then I become his worst nightmare. And unlike the lawyers and investigators he's bought off in the past, I can't be intimidated, bribed, or stopped through legal channels. Do we understand each other, counselor?" There was a long pause. "I'll relay your message to Mr. Castellanos, though I suspect he'll view it as confirmation that you're not a reasonable person. Reasonable people don't get soldiers killed with defective armor and then cover it up. Reasonable people don't threaten 8-year-old girls. Your client is a traitor and a murderer, and he's finally crossed someone who has the skills and motivation to hold him accountable. You might want to start looking for new employment, because when this is over, Castellanos Defense Systems is going to be a memory and a cautionary tale." Ryan ended the call and stood in the middle of the airport terminal, travelers flowing around him like water around a stone, and felt the last pretense of his civilian life fall away completely. He'd tried to do this the right way, tried to help Rebecca while maintaining some semblance of normalcy. But Castellanos had escalated, had made it personal, had threatened Zoe. Now there was no going back, no middle ground between success and failure. This had become a zero-sum game, and Ryan was prepared to play it with every skill he'd learned in 8 years of operating in places where rules were suggestions and survival was earned through ruthless efficiency. The drive back from Des Moines took less time than the drive there, Ryan pushing the speed limit and running through operational scenarios. Step 1 was securing Rebecca and the evidence at the farmhouse. Step 2 was finding Sarah Vance and convincing her to testify. Step 3 was gathering enough additional evidence to make Castellanos' legal defense impossible. And Step 4, if all else failed, was making Castellanos personally understand the consequences of his actions in ways that didn't require courts or lawyers. He called Rebecca from the road. Change of plans. We're accelerating the timeline. Castellanos just made serious threats about exposing classified information from my service record. That means he's desperate, which makes him more dangerous but also more vulnerable. We need to move fast, hit hard, and finish this before he can deploy whatever assets he's holding in reserve. What do you need from me? Rebecca asked, her voice steady despite the stress Ryan could hear underneath. I need you to prepare for trial like it's happening next week instead of in 6 weeks. I need every piece of evidence organized, every argument refined, every witness statement ready to go. If we can force an early court date, if we can get in front of a jury before Castellanos is ready, we might catch him flat-footed. Judges don't usually grant early trial dates without compelling reasons. Then we create compelling reasons. We file emergency motions claiming witness intimidation and threats against your life. We make enough noise that the court has to respond. Get creative, get aggressive, get attention. Make this case too public for Castellanos to bury quietly. That's risky. If we push too hard and lose, it could prejudice the jury against us. If we don't push hard, we might not live to see trial, Ryan said bluntly. Castellanos escalated tonight. He threatened my daughter and tried to blackmail me with classified information. That tells me he's running out of subtle options and preparing to get messy. Better to control the chaos than wait for it to find us. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, then said, My father used to say that the best defense is a relentless offense. I think he'd approve of this approach. Your father was a smart man. Start making calls. I'm going to track down Sarah Vance tomorrow and see if I can convince her to flip. If we can get her testimony about what she saw working for Castellanos, combined with your father's documents, we might have enough to survive even without the financial records linking him to Hawthorne. After ending the call, Ryan drove the rest of the way to the farmhouse in focused silence, his mind already working through the conversation he'd have with Sarah Vance. She was the key, the insider who'd been pushed out and who might be angry enough or scared enough or principled enough to speak truth despite the NDAs and threats. Finding the right pressure point, the right combination of incentive and reassurance, would determine whether she became an ally or remained silent. The farmhouse appeared unchanged as Ryan pulled up near midnight, Rebecca's Lexus still under its tarp, lights burning in the kitchen windows. He let himself in to find Rebecca surrounded by files and legal pads, her laptop open to what appeared to be a court filing, working with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd been at it for hours. I've drafted an emergency motion for expedited trial, she said without looking up, claiming ongoing witness intimidation, threats to my personal safety, and evidence that the defendant is actively working to obstruct justice. It's aggressive, probably won't get granted, but it'll put pressure on Castellanos and make the judge aware that something serious is happening. Good. File it first thing tomorrow. What else? I contacted 3 legal aid organizations and 2 civil rights groups about the case. If we can frame this as not just product liability, but as systematic corruption that endangers military personnel, we might get additional support and resources. And more importantly, we get media attention that makes it harder for Castellanos to make us disappear quietly. Ryan nodded approval. Rebecca was thinking tactically now, understanding that their survival depended on visibility and on making the case too public to bury through violence. What about the DOJ contact, the one who could fast-track an investigation into Hawthorne? I sent her everything we have on Hawthorne and Castellanos. She's reviewing it now, said she'd get back to me within 48 hours about whether there's enough for an official investigation. But she warned me that even if they open a case, military procurement fraud investigations can take years. We don't have years. We have weeks at most. I know, which is why I'm also working on a media strategy. If we can get this story to a major outlet, if we can turn it into a national conversation about military equipment safety and contractor accountability, then the pressure on Castellanos becomes more than just legal. It becomes political, public, impossible to ignore. Ryan sat down across from her, studying the woman who'd walked into his life 6 days ago, asking for help after 3 men had cornered her in a restaurant. She transformed from frightened victim to determined warrior, her lawyer's training combining with personal stake to make her formidable in ways that had nothing to do with physical combat. He could see why Captain Rodriguez had raised such a daughter. The same determination, the same refusal to back down when justice demanded action. "Tomorrow I'm going to Des Moines to find Sarah Vance," Ryan said. "I want you to stay here. Keep working on the filings and the media strategy. Don't answer the door for anyone except me. If something happens, if you hear anything unusual, there's a safe room in the basement. Reinforced walls, separate phone line, enough supplies for 3 days. Marcus designed this place for worst-case scenarios." "Do you really think Castellanos will send people here?" "I think we've backed him into a corner, and cornered animals are unpredictable. Better to prepare for violence we don't need than need violence we didn't prepare for." Rebecca nodded, fear flickering across her face before being suppressed through visible effort. "My father died for this. 20 Marines died because of Castellanos' greed. I'm not going to dishonor their sacrifice by hiding or giving up, no matter how scared I am." "Being scared doesn't mean you're weak," Ryan said. "It means you're smart enough to understand the stakes. Your father would be proud of you, Rebecca, of your courage, your commitment, your refusal to let his death be meaningless." "I hope so," she said quietly. "I hope when this is over, whether we win or lose, I can visit his grave and tell him we tried, that we fought back against the corruption that killed him, that his daughter didn't let the bad people win just because fighting them was hard." They worked together until 2 in the morning, Ryan reviewing security protocols while Rebecca refined her legal arguments. At some point, coffee appeared, probably made by Rebecca, though Ryan couldn't remember seeing her leave the table. The farmhouse creaked and settled around them, old wood adjusting to temperature changes, normal sounds that Ryan's combat-trained awareness cataloged and dismissed as non-threatening. Finally, Rebecca's eyes were closing despite the coffee, her head nodding forward in that way that signals complete exhaustion. Ryan gently closed her laptop and guided her toward the spare bedroom, her protests about needing to finish the motion dying as sleep claimed her mid-sentence. Alone in the kitchen, Ryan pulled out his phone and reviewed the information Gunderson had sent about Sarah Vance. She lived in a modest house in Des Moines suburbs, worked at Morrison & Associates legal firm, had 2 children aged 13 and 11. Her social media showed a woman trying to maintain normalcy after job loss, pictures of soccer games and school concerts, cheerful posts about family dinners that didn't quite hide the stress underneath. She'd worked for Castellanos for 7 years before being fired. 7 years of managing his calendar, handling his correspondence, sitting in on meetings where decisions were made and deals were struck. If anyone knew where evidence could be found, where pressure points existed, where corruption was documented, it would be Sarah Vance. The question was how to approach her without triggering the fear that had kept her silent so far. Threatening her would be counterproductive. She'd already been threatened by Castellanos, and adding more threats would just reinforce her silence. Bribing her was possible, but risky, as loyalty bought with money was loyalty that could be rebought by higher bidders. What Sarah Vance needed was something else. She needed to believe that speaking out would make a difference, that her testimony would lead to justice rather than just getting her sued or killed. She needed reassurance that her children would be protected, that the NDA she'd signed couldn't actually keep her silent about criminal activity, that doing the right thing wouldn't destroy the life she'd built after escaping Castellanos' employment. Ryan could provide those things. He could offer protection through his SEAL contacts, legal cover through Rebecca's expertise, and the moral argument that silence made her complicit in the deaths of 20 Marines. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing about this was easy, but it was possible. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. Marcus Webb, calling from Afghanistan with timing that suggested he'd heard about Ryan using the farmhouse for something other than peaceful contemplation. "You want to tell me why Gunderson is asking me about my property's security features?" Marcus said without preamble, his voice carrying that particular blend of amusement and concern that old friends develop. Because the last time someone asked about my security features, it was because they were planning something that would definitely void my insurance. I'm helping someone, Ryan said simply. Someone whose father saved my life. It's gotten complicated. Complicated enough that you sent your daughter to my wife? Ellen called me. Said Zoe arrived safely and is already in love with the horses, but that she could tell the kid was worried about her dad. What kind of complicated are we talking about, Carter? Ryan gave him the condensed version. Rebecca's case, Castellanos' threats, the defective armor that had killed Captain Rodriguez, and 19 other Marines. Marcus listened without interruption, the kind of listening that comes from years of tactical briefings where every detail matters. Victor Castellanos, Marcus said when Ryan finished. I've heard stories about him. None of them good. You're sure you want to go up against someone that connected? I don't want to, Ryan admitted, but he threatened Zoe. That changed the calculation. Yeah, it would. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Okay, here's what I can offer. I've got 2 guys from my security team rotating back stateside next week. Good operators, former Rangers, trustworthy. I can divert them to you for a couple weeks if you need backup. They're not cheap, but for you I'll cover the expense. Call it payback for Yemen. Marcus, I can't ask you to... You're not asking, I'm offering. 20 dead Marines deserves justice, and if this Castellanos bastard is as dirty as you're saying, someone needs to put him down. Might as well be you with proper support. I'll have them contact you in 72 hours. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep my farmhouse intact and my wife's expectations reasonable about how long Zoe's staying. Ellen's already talking about homeschooling her if this takes more than a month. Apparently your daughter is a delightful influence on the horses. Despite everything, Ryan smiled. Tell Ellen thank you. And thank you, Marcus. I won't forget this. You better not. You still owe me for pulling your ass out of that clusterfuck in Mosul. Now go get some sleep. You sound like you've been running on fumes and stubbornness, and that's a good way to make mistakes that get people killed. After ending the call, Ryan did try to sleep, stretching out on the living room couch with his gun within reach, and his awareness tuned to any sound that didn't belong. But sleep was elusive. His mind replaying the evening's conversations, calculating odds and outcomes, seeing Zoe's face as she'd walk down the jetway toward a plane that would take her to safety. He'd made his choice when he'd stood up at Romano's 6 days ago. Every decision since then had been consequence and escalation, each step leading inexorably toward this moment where peaceful resolution had become impossible, and violence waited just beyond the horizon like a storm everyone could see approaching but no one could prevent. Tomorrow, he'd find Sarah Vance and make his pitch for her testimony. Tomorrow, Rebecca would file motions that would put Castellanos on notice that they were done playing defense. Tomorrow, the war would continue with both sides understanding that this was no longer about legal maneuvering or financial settlements, but about something more fundamental: justice for the dead, accountability for the powerful, and the question of whether one man with the right skills and sufficient motivation could stand against institutional corruption. Ryan closed his eyes and tried to find rest in the darkness, knowing that whatever came next would require everything he'd learned in 8 years of combat operations. Captain Rodriguez had saved his life outside Kandahar. Now Ryan was going to honor that debt by finishing what Rodriguez had started, by exposing the corruption that had gotten him killed, by making sure his daughter could hold her head up, knowing her father had died a hero fighting for justice. The mission was clear: keep Rebecca alive, build the case, force Castellanos into a position where he had no choice but to face consequences for his actions. And if legal justice proved impossible, if the system failed to deliver accountability, then Ryan would deliver it personally through methods he'd learned in places where justice wore a different face. He drifted finally into uneasy sleep, filled with dreams of Kandahar and Cedar Falls overlapping, Sarah's voice telling him to protect their daughter, mixing with Captain Rodriguez's face as enemy fire stitched the ground around them. When he woke 3 hours later to cold dawn light filtering through farmhouse windows, the dreams faded, but their weight remained, pressing down on his chest like physical presence. Rebecca was already awake, working at the kitchen table with the desperate energy of someone who knows time is running out. She looked up as Ryan entered, offering a tired smile. I didn't hear you come in last night. Did you sleep? Enough, Ryan lied. You? A few hours. I've been refining the emergency motion. I think it's ready to file. Then file it, today. Make noise. draw attention, turn this into something Castellanos can't handle quietly. What about you? You said something about finding Sarah Vance? Ryan poured coffee, the ritual giving him something to do with his hands while his mind organized the day ahead. I'm heading to Des Moines this morning, going to have a conversation with her, see if I can convince her that staying silent is more dangerous than speaking out. If she agrees to testify, we'll have the insider perspective that makes your father's documents devastating instead of just damning. And if she refuses, then we find another way. But she's our best shot, Rebecca. She worked for Castellanos for 7 years. She knows where bodies are buried, figuratively and maybe literally. If we can get her on our side, everything changes. Rebecca stood and crossed to where Ryan was standing, placing her hand on his arm with surprising gentleness. Be careful today. Castellanos knows we're a threat now. He'll be watching for opportunities to eliminate that threat permanently. I'm always careful, Ryan said, though they both knew it was only partially true. Careful didn't describe what he'd done at Romano's, or how he'd threatened Castellanos' lawyer, or the way he was preparing to wage war against a defense contractor with unlimited resources. But careful did describe how he'd protected Zoe, how he was protecting Rebecca, how he approached each tactical decision with full awareness of consequences. I'll call when I have news, Ryan said. Don't leave the farmhouse. Don't trust anyone who shows up unless I've called ahead to confirm they're coming. And if something feels wrong, trust that instinct and get to the safe room immediately. You sound like you're expecting an attack. I'm expecting Castellanos to do something desperate, because that's what people do when they realize they're losing control. Whether that desperation manifests as legal maneuvering or physical violence, I want you prepared for both. Ryan left the farmhouse as morning sun turned frost-covered fields into landscape that looked almost beautiful despite the season's death. The drive to Des Moines gave him time to prepare mentally for the conversation ahead, to find the right combination of words that would convince Sarah Vance to risk everything she'd built for the sake of justice for people she'd never met. It was a big ask, maybe too big. But Ryan had been trained to accomplish impossible missions through proper preparation and unwavering commitment. Sarah Vance was just another objective, another target that needed to be approached with the right strategy. And if she refused, if she chose safety over conscience, then Ryan would find another way. Because failure wasn't an option when 20 Marines demanded justice and an 8-year-old girl deserved to grow up in a world where bad people faced consequences for their actions. The mission continued, and Ryan Carter, plumber and SEAL, and father and warrior, was going to see it through to the end, whatever that end looked like, and whatever price it demanded. Sarah Vance's house was a modest 2-story colonial in a neighborhood where the lawns were maintained but not manicured, where minivans and sedans lined driveways and basketball hoops stood sentinel over quiet streets. Ryan parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, his trained eyes cataloging the environment with automatic precision. A dog walker 3 houses down. A delivery truck making its rounds. No obvious surveillance, no vehicles that screamed government or corporate security. Either Castellanos wasn't watching Sarah Vance anymore, or his watchers were better than Ryan expected. It was 9:30 on a Saturday morning, chosen deliberately for its ordinariness. Weekend morning when kids would be home, when a knock at the door wouldn't trigger immediate alarm, when the rhythms of suburban life provided cover for a conversation that could change everything. Ryan rang the doorbell and waited, aware of the camera above the doorframe recording his presence. After a moment, a woman's voice came through the intercom, cautious but not hostile. "Can I help you?" "Ms. Vance, my name is Ryan Carter. I'm working with Rebecca Martinez on a legal matter involving your former employer. I need 5 minutes of your time, just to talk, nothing more." There was a long pause. Ryan could imagine her internal calculation, weighing curiosity against fear, obligation against self-preservation. Finally, the door opened to the length of a security chain, and Sarah Vance peered out with eyes that had learned wariness the hard way. She was 42 according to Gunderson's intel, but looked older in the way that stress ages people prematurely. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her clothing casual Saturday wear, but her expression carried the weight of someone who'd seen things she wished she could forget. "I signed an NDA," Sarah said without preamble. "I can't discuss anything about my employment with Castellanos Defense Systems. I'm sorry Miss Martinez is having trouble, but I can't help her. The NDA doesn't cover criminal activity, Ryan said gently. And it definitely doesn't prevent you from testifying if subpoenaed. Ms. Vance, I'm not here to threaten you or pressure you. I'm here to give you an opportunity to do the right thing for the right reasons. Can I please come in for 5 minutes? Your neighbors are starting to notice. Sarah glanced past him at the street, saw curtains twitching in windows, and made a decision. She closed the door to remove the chain, then opened it fully. 5 minutes. My kids are upstairs doing homework. I don't want them involved in whatever this is. Ryan stepped into a living room that spoke of middle-class struggle. Furniture that was quality but aging, family photos arranged with care, the particular tidiness of someone who maintains control through organization. Sarah gestured to a chair but remained standing herself, arms crossed defensively. Before you start whatever pitch you've prepared, Sarah said, you should know that I've already been contacted by 3 different lawyers about this case. I told them all the same thing I'm telling you. I can't help. I won't help. I have 2 children to support, a mortgage I can barely afford, and a career I'm trying to rebuild. Testifying against Victor Castellanos would destroy all of that. 20 Marines were destroyed, Ryan said quietly. Killed by defective armor that your former employer knowingly sold to the military. One of those Marines was Captain Benjamin Rodriguez, who spent his last months trying to expose the fraud that got him and his men killed. His daughter is the lawyer you're refusing to help. Sarah's expression flickered with something that might have been guilt or grief. I know about Captain Rodriguez. I saw the reports. I read the internal memos about the investigation. And I'm sorry, truly I am. But my being sorry doesn't change the fact that I have responsibilities. I can't sacrifice my children's future for justice that probably won't happen anyway. Ryan leaned forward slightly, keeping his posture non-threatening but his voice carrying absolute conviction. What if I could guarantee your children's future? What if I could ensure that testifying wouldn't destroy you financially or professionally? Would that change your answer? How could you possibly guarantee that? Miss Martinez's civil suit is going to win, Ryan said, with certainty he mostly felt. When it does, the settlement will be substantial. She's already agreed to compensate any witnesses who testify, not as payment for testimony, but as recognition of the professional and personal costs involved. Your mortgage, your kids' education, your legal fees if Castellanos tries to sue you for NDA violation, all covered. Beyond that, I have contacts in witness protection and private security. If you're worried about physical safety, I can arrange protection that goes beyond what any government program could provide. Sarah was shaking her head before he finished. You're talking about money and security, but you're not understanding the real problem. Victor Castellanos doesn't just threaten you. He destroys you. He has lawyers who will tie you up in litigation for years. He has connections to judges and politicians who will make sure you never work in your field again. He has investigators who will dig into every mistake you've ever made and use it against you. I've seen what happens to people who cross him. They don't just lose their jobs, they lose everything. Then help us make sure he loses everything first, Ryan said. Ms. Vance, I understand your fear, I do. But consider what staying silent costs. Not just in terms of justice for Captain Rodriguez and those Marines, but in terms of what it teaches your children. You have a daughter, right? 13 years old? What do you want her to learn about standing up to powerful people who do terrible things? That safety is more important than conscience? That fear is an acceptable reason to let evil go unpunished? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She angrily blinked away. That's not fair. You don't get to use my children against me. I'm not using them against you. I'm asking you to think about what legacy you're leaving them. Your daughter will grow up in a world where defense contractors can kill soldiers through negligence and face no consequences because people like you chose silence over testimony. Is that the world you want for her? The world I want for her is one where her mother isn't bankrupt or dead because she testified against a man who has unlimited resources and no conscience, Sarah shot back. You come in here with your guarantees and your moral arguments, but you don't have to live with the consequences. I do. My children do. Children. Ryan stood, recognizing that pure argument wasn't working, that Sarah's fear was too deeply rooted to be dislodged by logic or appeals to justice. He pulled out a card with his phone number written on it and set it on the coffee table between them. I'm not going to pressure you further, he said, "but I want you to think about something. Victor Castellanos is going down whether you testify or not. We have documents, we have evidence, we have momentum. The question isn't whether he faces consequences. It's whether you're part of delivering those consequences or whether you stay silent and let other people do the work. Either way, when this is over, you're going to have to look at yourself in the mirror and decide if you can live with the choice you made." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Captain Rodriguez saved my life once in Kandahar. I didn't know him well, just 30 seconds of someone pulling me out of an ambush while taking fire. But those 30 seconds meant I got to come home to my wife, got to be there when my daughter was born, got to have 3 more years with the woman I loved before cancer took her. Rodriguez gave me that gift, and then he died trying to expose the corruption that killed his Marines. I owe him a debt I can never fully repay. But you, Ms. Vance, you don't owe him anything except the truth, and maybe that's worth more than all the guarantees and protections I could offer." Sarah's face had gone pale. "He saved your life?" 8 years ago. An ambush outside Kandahar. I was a SEAL. He was Marine intelligence attached to our unit. I don't know why he was there or what his mission was, but when things went bad, he came back for me when he could have extracted safely. I survived because Benjamin Rodriguez believed some debts transcend self-preservation. Now I'm asking you to honor that same principle. Not for me, not even for his daughter, but for the 20 Marines who trusted their equipment to protect them and died when that trust was betrayed." Ryan left without waiting for a response, walking back to his truck through streets that seemed too peaceful for the weight of the conversation he'd just had. He didn't know if his words had reached Sarah Vance, if the combination of practical guarantees and moral appeal had been enough to overcome years of fear. All he could do was plant the seed and hope it grew before the trial date arrived. His phone rang as he reached his truck. "Rebecca," her voice tight with controlled excitement. "The judge granted the emergency motion. We have a preliminary hearing in 3 days to determine if there's sufficient cause for expedited trial." "Ryan, this is huge. If we can convince the judge that witness intimidation is ongoing, we might get a trial date within 2 weeks instead of 6. "That's good news," Ryan said, though part of him wondered if accelerating the timeline was tactical brilliance or desperation disguised as strategy. "What do we need for the hearing?" "Evidence of intimidation, testimony about threats, documentation of Castellanos' attempts to obstruct justice. I can provide most of that, but it would be stronger if we had a witness willing to testify about experiencing direct threats." "I'll work on it." "What about the media strategy?" "I have a meeting scheduled with a reporter from the Washington Post this afternoon. She covers defense contractor corruption, and she's very interested in the story. If she runs with it, this becomes national news. That's protection in itself. Harder to make someone disappear when journalists are actively covering their case." Ryan felt the pieces moving into position, the momentum building towards some inevitable conclusion. "Be careful with the reporter. Don't give her anything that could compromise the legal case or put you at additional risk. Background only, enough to generate interest but not enough to give Castellanos ammunition." "I know how to talk to reporters," Rebecca said, a hint of her lawyer's confidence returning. "This is what I do, Ryan. Strategy, persuasion, building narratives that juries and judges and the public can understand. Let me handle the legal and media warfare. You focus on finding us a witness." After ending the call, Ryan sat in his truck and tried to calculate odds of success. They had momentum, but not certainty. They had evidence, but not testimony. They had 3 days to build a case strong enough to convince a judge that expedited trial was warranted, and maybe 2 weeks after that to convince a jury that Victor Castellanos was guilty of negligent homicide and systematic fraud. It wasn't enough time. But it was the time they had, and Ryan had learned long ago that missions succeeded or failed based on what you did with available resources, not on wishing you had more. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Sarah Vance. Can we meet again? Somewhere private? I need to talk to someone who understands what this costs." Ryan stared at the message for a long moment, hope and caution warring in his chest. This could be Sarah deciding to testify, or it could be a trap, Castellanos using her to lure Ryan into a vulnerable position. Only one way to find out which. He texted back, "Grant Park, South Entrance, 1 hour. Come alone. Her response came quickly. I'll be there. Grant Park was a sprawling green space in the heart of Des Moines, large enough to provide multiple sightlines and exit routes, public enough that violence would be difficult to execute cleanly. Ryan arrived 30 minutes early, parking where he had clear view of the south entrance, and watched as Saturday afternoon crowds enjoyed the unseasonably warm November weather. Families with strollers, joggers and cyclists, a group of teenagers playing frisbee with abandon that suggested they believed themselves immortal. Sarah Vance arrived exactly on time, driving a Honda Accord that had seen better years, parking in the public lot, and walking toward the entrance with the careful awareness of someone who'd been threatened enough to develop paranoia. She wore jeans and a heavy jacket, sunglasses hiding her eyes, looking like any suburban mother running weekend errands. Ryan approached from her blind side, not to startle, but to demonstrate that he'd been watching, that his security consciousness matched or exceeded her own. Ms. Vance, thank you for coming. Sarah turned, her hand going to her chest in surprise, despite Ryan's attempt at gentle approach. God, you move quietly. Is that a SEAL thing? Years of practice. You said you needed to talk. Can we walk? I think better when I'm moving, and sitting still makes me feel like a target. They walked deeper into the park, along paths that wound through trees shedding their last leaves like reluctant surrender to winter. For several minutes, Sarah said nothing, her hands shoved in her jacket pockets, her breath visible in the cooling air. Ryan gave her the silence, understanding that some decisions required processing time, that pushing too hard could shatter whatever resolve had brought her here. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw things while working for Victor. Things I tried to ignore or rationalize or pretend were normal business practices. Meetings where he discussed selling equipment to foreign governments that were supposed to be embargoed. Emails about bribing Pentagon officials to approve contracts despite test failures. Conference calls where he laughed about cutting corners on safety features because soldiers are disposable and Congress will just order more. Ryan felt cold rage settle into his bones but kept his voice neutral. Did you document any of this? Some. Not as much as I should have. I'd take notes during meetings, file reports like any good assistant. But after a while, I realized that my notes were being used to protect Victor, not to maintain legitimate records. So I started keeping my own files. Nothing official, just copies of emails and meeting minutes that seemed particularly damaging. I told myself it was insurance, in case Victor ever decided I was a liability. Where are these files now? Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him, fear and determination mixing in her expression. Hidden. Multiple locations, multiple formats. I'm not stupid, Mr. Carter. If I testify, if I help Ms. Martinez, I need leverage to ensure my family stays safe. Those files are my leverage. That's smart, Ryan agreed. But leverage only works if the other side knows you have it and believes you'll use it. Are you prepared to go public with what you know? To sit in a courtroom and repeat it under oath while Castellanos' lawyers tried to destroy your credibility? I don't know, Sarah admitted. I came here hoping you could convince me that testifying is the right choice, that protecting my conscience is worth risking my children's stability. But standing here, thinking about actually doing it, I'm terrified. Victor doesn't make idle threats. If I testify, he'll come after me with everything he has. Then we make sure everything he has isn't enough, Ryan said. Ms. Vance, Sarah, I can't promise this will be easy or safe. What I can promise is that I will personally ensure your family's protection, not some government program or private security company, but me. I will stand between you and anyone Castellanos sends, and I'm very, very good at my job. You're one man. Victor has dozens of people, unlimited money, and no moral boundaries. I'm one man who spent 8 years being dropped into impossible situations with inadequate resources and told to accomplish the mission anyway. I never failed, not once, and I'm not going to start failing now when the mission is keeping safe the woman who can deliver justice for Captain Rodriguez and 20 dead Marines. Sarah studied him with the kind of assessment people develop when their survival depends on reading others accurately. You really believe we can win. Not just hope or wish, but actually believe it. I know we can win, Ryan said with absolute certainty. Because we have truth on our side, and eventually truth overwhelms even the best-funded lies. It might take time, it might cost more than we want to pay, but justice delayed isn't justice denied if we refuse to give up. My daughter asked me last night why I've been so stressed lately, Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. She's 13, old enough to see through my attempts to hide it. I told her work was complicated right now, but what I wanted to tell her was that her mother witnessed terrible things and stayed silent because being silent was easier than being brave. What kind of lesson is that for a teenage girl who's learning what kind of woman she wants to become? It's the lesson most of us learn eventually, Ryan said gently. That silence is complicity. That fear is reasonable, but can't be allowed to be determinative. That some things matter more than personal safety. Your daughter will understand that lesson better from watching you testify than from any conversation you could have. Sarah wiped at her eyes, makeup smearing slightly despite her attempt at composure. If I do this, if I testify, I need more than just your protection. I need legal cover, financial security for my family, and a plan for what happens after the trial when Victor's lawyers start coming after me for NDA violations and whatever else they can manufacture. Rebecca can handle the legal side. As for financial security, the settlement from this case is going to be substantial, and she's already committed to compensating witnesses fairly. After the trial, if you need to relocate or change careers or simply disappear for a while until things calm down, we can arrange that too. You have my word. The word of a man I met 3 hours ago. The word of a man whose daughter is currently hidden in Montana because I take threats seriously and follow through on commitments. The word of a former SEAL who's never broken a promise that mattered. It's not much, but it's what I have to offer. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant as she worked through calculations that balanced fear against conscience, risk against obligation. Around them, the park continued its Saturday afternoon routine, oblivious to the conversation that would determine whether justice reached a defense contractor who'd gotten away with murder for years. Okay, Sarah said finally, so quietly Ryan almost missed it. Okay, I'll testify. I'll give Ms. Martinez everything I have, the files, the emails, the meeting notes, and I'll sit in that courtroom and tell the truth about Victor Castellanos, even if it costs me everything. But you have to promise me something in return. Name it. If this goes bad, if Victor comes after my children, you get them somewhere safe. Not witness protection, not some government program, but actually safe. Can you promise me that? Ryan thought about Zoe in Montana, about the network of operators and contacts he'd built over 8 years of service, about the absolute commitment required to protect the innocent from those who'd harmed them. I promise. On my daughter's life, I promise that your children will be safe no matter what happens. Sarah nodded, decision made, and some of the tension left her shoulders as if speaking the words aloud had transferred the weight to someone else. When do you need me to testify? There's a preliminary hearing in 3 days. If you can be there, if you can tell the judge about what you witnessed at Castellanos Defense Systems, it'll strengthen our case for expedited trial. After that, we'll need you for the actual trial, probably within 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Sarah repeated, testing the timeline. That's not much time to prepare. It's the time we have. Castellanos is escalating, getting desperate. The faster we move, the less opportunity he has to obstruct or eliminate threats. Speed is our advantage right now. They exchanged contact information, Sarah promising to compile her files and send them to Rebecca by tomorrow evening. As she turned to leave, she paused and looked back at Ryan with an expression he couldn't quite read. Captain Rodriguez, she said. He saved your life? Yes. Then I guess we're both paying debts to dead men who believed in something more important than personal safety. I hope that belief turns out to be justified. It will be, Ryan said. I'll make sure of it. He watched Sarah walk back to her car, her posture straighter than when she'd arrived, as if deciding to testify had lifted some burden she'd been carrying since being fired. It was a small victory in a larger war, but victories accumulated if you fought smart and refused to concede ground unnecessarily. Ryan called Rebecca from his truck. We have our witness. Sarah Vance agreed to testify. She's sending you files tonight, copies of emails and meeting notes that document Castellanos' fraud. It's going to be damaging. Rebecca's intake of breath was sharp with hope and relief. That's incredible. Ryan, with her testimony combined with my father's documents, we actually have a case, a real case that can survive courtroom challenge. Don't celebrate yet. We still have to keep her alive and willing to testify for the next 2 weeks, and we have to assume Castellanos will escalate once he learns she's cooperating. This is where things get dangerous. More dangerous than they already are. Much more. Up until now, we've been an annoyance, a legal problem Castellanos could handle through intimidation and lawyers. But Sarah Vance testifying changes the equation. She's an insider who can verify everything your father documented. That makes her and us existential threats. Castellanos will respond accordingly. What do we do? We prepare for war, Ryan said simply. Legal war through your motions and media strategy, and possibly literal war if Castellanos decides that eliminating problems is easier than defending against them in court. Are you prepared for that possibility? I'm prepared to see this through, Rebecca said with steel in her voice. Whatever it takes. My father didn't die so I could give up when things got hard. Then get ready. The next 2 weeks are going to determine everything. The preliminary hearing 3 days later took place in a federal courthouse in Kansas City, chosen as neutral ground between Cedar Falls and Castellanos' headquarters. Ryan accompanied Rebecca, positioned himself in the back of the courtroom where he could watch entrances and assess threats, and listened as she presented her case for expedited trial. Sarah Vance testified first, her voice shaking slightly, but her words clear as she described working for Castellanos' defense systems, the meetings where corners were cut and test results falsified, the culture of prioritizing profit over safety. Under Rebecca's careful questioning, Sarah painted a picture of systematic fraud that made the judge's expression progressively grimmer. Castellanos' legal team, 3 lawyers in expensive suits who'd probably billed more in the past week than Sarah Vance earned in a year, attempted to discredit her testimony through aggressive cross-examination. They questioned her memory, suggested she was motivated by revenge after being fired, implied that NDA violations made her unreliable. But Sarah held firm, her answers consistent and her documentation thorough enough to counter most challenges. Rebecca followed with testimony about the threat she'd received, the men who'd cornered her in Cedar Falls, the clear pattern of witness intimidation designed to prevent the case from reaching trial. She entered into evidence the photographs her father had sent showing Castellanos meeting with General Hawthorne, suggesting corruption that reached beyond simple product liability into military procurement fraud. The judge, a 60-year-old woman named Patricia Morrison, who'd presided over federal court for 20 years, listened with the careful attention of someone who understood the significance of what was being presented. When both sides had finished their arguments, she called a brief recess before delivering her ruling. Ryan used the break to check his phone. 3 messages from Gunderson. Marcus's guys landed in Des Moines this morning. Call them. Followed by 2 phone numbers. The reinforcements had arrived faster than expected, which suggested Marcus had pulled significant strings to redirect his security team mid-contract. The courtroom reassembled. Judge Morrison looked out over the assembled lawyers and witnesses with an expression that suggested she'd reached a decision she expected to be challenged. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony presented today, she began, her voice carrying the formal weight of judicial authority, I find sufficient cause to grant the plaintiff's motion for expedited trial. The pattern of witness intimidation documented by Ms. Martinez, combined with Ms. Vance's testimony regarding systematic fraud at Castellanos Defense Systems, suggests that delaying trial would prejudice the plaintiff's case and potentially endanger witnesses. Castellanos' lead attorney stood immediately. Your Honor, we object strenuously to this ruling. The defense requires adequate time to prepare, to review the extensive documentation, to conduct our own discovery. 2 weeks is insufficient for a case of this complexity. Your objection is noted for the record, Judge Morrison said coolly. However, the defense has had 18 months since the initial filing to prepare. The acceleration is being driven by circumstances largely created by your client's alleged actions. Trial will commence in 14 days. Both parties will have 1 week for final discovery and witness preparation. Any motions for continuance will be viewed with extreme skepticism unless accompanied by compelling justification. This court is adjourned. The gavel's crack echoed like a gunshot in the suddenly silent courtroom. Rebecca's face showed restrained triumph, understanding that this was victory but not the victory, that the real battle would happen in 2 weeks when they faced a jury. Castellanos' lawyers were already huddling, their urgent whispers suggesting emergency strategy sessions and appeals they'd file before the day ended. Ryan moved to Rebecca's side as the courtroom emptied. That went better than expected. Judge Morrison has a reputation for not tolerating witness intimidation, Rebecca said quietly. And she lost a nephew in Afghanistan. I think the military connection might have influenced her ruling, made her more sympathetic to the idea that defense contractors need accountability. Whatever the reason, we have 14 days, 2 weeks to prepare for trial, to keep Sarah Vance safe, to finalize evidence and witness testimony. It's going to be the longest 2 weeks of our lives. They were interrupted by Sarah Vance, who approached with obvious nervousness. Miss Martinez, Mr. Carter, did I do okay? I felt like those lawyers made me look unreliable. You did perfectly, Rebecca assured her. Cross-examination is designed to create doubt, but your core testimony was solid, and your documentation backed up everything you said. The judge believed you. That's what matters. What happens now? Now we prepare for trial, Ryan said, which means I'm going to assign you personal security. 2 former Rangers who work for a friend of mine. They'll stay with you and your family until this is over. Make sure Castellanos can't reach you or pressure you to recant. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but understood the necessity. My kids are going to have questions about why we suddenly have bodyguards. Tell them you're helping with an important legal case and some people aren't happy about it, Rebecca suggested. Tell them as much truth as they can handle at their ages. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. They parted with promises to coordinate over the next 2 weeks, Sarah heading back to Des Moines with her new shadows, Rebecca and Ryan returning to the farmhouse to begin the intensive preparation required for trial. In the truck, Ryan called the numbers Gunderson had provided. The first call was answered by a voice that carried the particular blend of professional courtesy and barely contained violence that characterized experienced operators. This is Ramirez. Tom Gunderson gave me your number, said you and your partner were available for security work. Carter? Yeah, we've been briefed. Marcus says you're up against a defense contractor with deep pockets and no conscience. Sounds like fun. What do you need? I need a mother and 2 kids in Des Moines protected 24/7 for the next 2 weeks. The woman is testifying against her former employer and said employer has a history of making problems disappear. Think you can handle that? Can handle it with one hand and most of my attention on other things, Ramirez said with casual confidence. My partner Chen is former Delta, and I spent 8 years in Rangers before going private. Between us, we've done protective details in 14 countries, most of them actively hostile. Suburban Des Moines is basically a vacation. Don't underestimate the threat. Victor Castellanos has resources and connections most hostiles don't. If he sends people after Sarah Vance, they'll be professionals. Then they'll be disappointed when they run into other professionals who are better at this than they are. Send me the details. Address, family composition, threat assessment. We'll lock it down. Ryan provided the information and hung up feeling marginally better about Sarah's safety. Ramirez and Chen were good people, the kind Marcus trusted with his life and his operations. If anyone could keep Sarah alive through the next 2 weeks, it was them. The remaining 13 days blurred into intensive preparation that consumed every waking hour. Rebecca worked 18-hour days refining her arguments, preparing witnesses, anticipating every angle Castellanos' lawyers might pursue. Ryan coordinated security, ran background checks on the jury pool once names were released, and maintained constant communication with the protective detail watching Sarah Vance. The Washington Post story broke on day 5, a front-page investigation into defense contractor fraud that named Victor Castellanos and detailed the allegations of defective armor. The article drew heavily on Rebecca's documentation while carefully avoiding anything that might prejudice the trial, and the response was immediate and intense. Congressional committees announced investigations. Pentagon officials issued carefully worded statements about reviewing procurement procedures. And most importantly, the case became too public to bury quietly. Castellanos responded through his lawyers and his media team, issuing denials and counter-accusations, suggesting that Rebecca was a disgruntled daughter pursuing a vendetta, that Sarah Vance was a fired employee with credibility issues, that the test results were being misinterpreted by people without technical expertise. But the defensive posture was telling. He was responding instead of controlling the narrative, always a position of weakness. On day 9, someone tried to break into Sarah Vance's house at 3 in the morning. Ramirez and Chen were ready, intercepting the intruder before he reached the door and delivering him to local police with enough evidence of attempted breaking and entering to ensure charges would stick. The would-be burglar claimed to be a junkie looking for easy valuables, but his military-grade lock-picking tools and the complete absence of drugs in his system suggested otherwise. Rebecca filed an emergency motion documenting the break-in attempt as further evidence of witness intimidation. Judge Morrison issued a strongly worded warning to Castellanos' legal team and assigned a federal marshal to provide additional security at the trial. On day 12, Gunderson called with information that changed everything. We got the financial records. My hacker contact found offshore accounts and wire transfers linking Castellanos to General Hawthorne. $2 million over 3 years, routed through shell corporations and dummy accounts, but traceable if you know what you're looking for. It's not going to be admissible in civil court without proper subpoenas, but it's enough to trigger a federal investigation. How fast can DOJ move on this? Ryan asked. Already moving. Rebecca's contact there received the information anonymously this morning. They're convening a grand jury next week to review evidence of bribery and military procurement fraud. Even if your civil case somehow fails, Castellanos is facing federal criminal charges that he can't buy or intimidate his way out of. It was the insurance policy they needed, the guarantee that even if trial went badly, justice would eventually reach Victor Castellanos. Ryan relayed the information to Rebecca, who received it with exhausted relief. "We're going to win," she said, and for the first time since this began, her voice carried absolute conviction. Between Sarah's testimony, my father's documents, the financial records, and the media attention, there's no way a jury looks at this evidence and sides with Castellanos. We're actually going to win. Don't count it until the verdict is read, Ryan cautioned, but he allowed himself to share her hope. They'd built something solid, something that could withstand legal assault and emerge intact. All that remained was surviving the next 2 days until trial began. The night before trial, Ryan drove out to the farmhouse one last time to ensure everything was ready. Rebecca was still awake at midnight, rehearsing her opening statement, her voice hoarse from hours of practice. Zoe had called earlier from Montana, chattering excitedly about horses and mountains and asking when Daddy was coming to visit, her innocence a reminder of everything Ryan was fighting to protect. "You should sleep," Ryan said to Rebecca. "Tomorrow starts the marathon, and you need to be sharp." "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see my father's face, and I think about how he died trying to expose this corruption. Tomorrow I get to honor that sacrifice by putting Castellanos in front of a jury. I can't screw it up." "You won't screw it up. You're brilliant and prepared, and you have truth on your side. Trust the work you've done." Rebecca looked at him with an expression that mixed gratitude and something deeper. "When this started, when those men cornered me at Romano's, I was terrified and alone and certain I was going to lose everything. And then you intervened, this plumber with paint-stained clothes who turned out to be a former SEAL with a hero complex and a debt to my father. You've risked everything to help me, Ryan. Your anonymity, your safety, your relationship with your daughter. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You thank me by winning tomorrow," Ryan said, "by getting justice for your father and those Marines, by proving that courage and determination can overcome institutional corruption. That's all the thanks I need." "What happens after the trial?" "Assuming we win, assuming Castellanos goes to prison and his company collapses, what then? Do you go back to Cedar Falls and resume being a plumber? Do we just pretend these 2 weeks never happened?" Ryan didn't have an answer that felt honest. The truth was, he didn't know what came after. He'd been so focused on the mission, on keeping Rebecca alive and building the case, that he hadn't allowed himself to think about afterwards. Going back to Cedar Falls meant returning to a town that now knew his past, that had seen him take down 3 men in a restaurant and would never quite look at him the same way. Being just a plumber after this felt like trying to fit back into clothes he'd outgrown. "I don't know what comes after," Ryan admitted, "but I know my daughter needs her father, and she deserves to grow up somewhere stable and safe. So probably yes, I go back to Cedar Falls and figure out how to be normal again, or as normal as I can be after this." Rebecca stepped closer, and in the dim kitchen light she looked younger and older simultaneously, aged by stress but animated by purpose. What if normal isn't what you need? What if you've spent 3 years trying to be something you're not, and these 2 weeks reminded you of who you actually are? Who I actually am? Got a lot of people killed, Ryan said quietly. Who I actually am is good at violence and strategy and accomplishing missions through any means necessary. That's not a person who should be raising an 8-year-old girl. That's not all you are. You're also someone who stands up for people who need help, who honors debts even when it costs everything, who protected me and Sarah and everyone involved in this case because it was the right thing to do. That's who you are too, Ryan. Maybe both versions can exist. Maybe you don't have to choose. Before Ryan could respond, his phone buzzed with an alert. Text from Ramirez. Possible surveillance on the Vance house. 2 vehicles, occupants watching but not approaching. Advised. Ryan stepped away from Rebecca, his mind instantly shifting into tactical mode. Stay here. Lock the doors. Don't answer for anyone except me. He was moving toward the door even as he texted Ramirez back. Do not engage unless they make a move. Document everything. Local PD on standby? The response came quickly. PD notified and en route. We've got this. Ryan drove through the night toward Des Moines, his truck eating miles while his mind calculated possibilities and responses. This was it. Castellanos making his final play before trial, attempting to eliminate or intimidate Sarah Vance before she could testify. The fact that he was trying despite knowing about the protective detail suggested either desperation or confidence in his team's capabilities. By the time Ryan reached Sarah's neighborhood, police cars were parked on both ends of the street and the suspicious vehicles were gone. Ramirez met him on the sidewalk, his expression professionally neutral, but his body language suggesting recent adrenaline. They left as soon as the cops rolled up, Ramirez reported. Got photos of the vehicles and partial plates before they rabbited. Looked like professional surveillance, not hired muscle. These guys knew what they were doing. Did they approach the house? Negative. Just watched from positions with good sight lines. If we hadn't been actively scanning for watchers, we might have missed them. That's what concerns me, Ryan said. Professional surveillance means they're planning something sophisticated, not just a crude intimidation attempt. They were gathering information for an operation. What do you want to do? Ryan thought quickly, weighing options against the timeline. Trial started in 9 hours. Sarah needed to be at the courthouse, needed to testify, needed to be the insider witness that made Rebecca's case unassailable. But getting her there safely, while unknown professionals planned unknown operations, required resources and coordination they might not have. We move her now, Ryan decided. Not to a hotel or safe house, but directly to the courthouse. There are secure rooms where witnesses can wait under federal protection. She stays there until it's time to testify, and after she testifies, we move her and her family to a secure location until this is completely over. What about her kids? They go to your partner Chen's family in Chicago. Temporary placement, explained as a short school trip. No details about why. If Castellanos' people can't find them, they can't be used as leverage. Ramirez nodded approval. Smart. Remove all the pressure points. I'll coordinate with Chen. You want us to continue protective detail after trial? Until Castellanos is convicted or dead, whichever comes first. Marcus is paying you, so bill whatever you need for extended operations. Marcus already told us this one's pro bono. Something about paying forward a debt to Captain Rodriguez. Apparently the good captain pulled Marcus's ass out of a fire in Fallujah 10 years back. Small world. How many people that Marine saved? The comment hit Ryan with unexpected force. Captain Benjamin Rodriguez had saved multiple lives, had built a network of debts through courage and competence, and now those debts were being repaid by people who'd never met him, but honored his memory anyway. That was the kind of legacy that mattered, the kind that transcended death and created ripples that changed the world long after the person was gone. Trial began at 9 the next morning in a federal courthouse packed with media, spectators, and enough security to handle a presidential visit. Victor Castellanos sat at the defense table surrounded by his legal team, looking calm and confident in an expensive suit, his expression suggesting amused tolerance for these proceedings that would ultimately vindicate him. Rebecca sat at the plaintiff's table with an associate she'd brought in to help with logistics, her hands steady as she organized files despite the massive pressure riding on her performance. Ryan was positioned in the public gallery, where he could watch both the proceedings and the entrances, his awareness encompassing jury reactions and potential threats in equal measure. Judge Morrison entered, and the courtroom rose, then settled as she began explaining procedures to the jury. 12 citizens who would determine whether Victor Castellanos was guilty of the negligence that had killed 20 Marines and Captain Benjamin Rodriguez. 12 ordinary people who held extraordinary power for the next week. Rebecca's opening statement was masterful, painting a picture of systematic corruption that was both technically accurate and emotionally compelling. She spoke about Captain Rodriguez, about his dedication to the Corps, and his determination to expose fraud even when it cost him his life. She spoke about the 20 Marines who died trusting equipment that had been designed to protect them but had failed due to corporate greed and falsified testing. She spoke about Sarah Vance, who'd witnessed the corruption from inside and who was risking everything to ensure accountability. Castellanos' lead attorney countered with the defense's opening, arguing that the armor had met all specifications, that the Kandahar incident was a tragedy but not a crime, that Miss Martinez was a grieving daughter whose judgment was clouded by loss and whose case was built on misunderstood technical data and the testimony of a disgruntled former employee. The first 2 days of trial were consumed with technical testimony from engineers and testing experts, dense material that made several jurors' eyes glaze despite the lawyers' best efforts to make it accessible. But on day 3, Sarah Vance took the stand, and the courtroom came alive with human drama that transcended technical specifications. Under Rebecca's questioning, Sarah described her 7 years working for Victor Castellanos, the culture of prioritizing profit over safety, the meetings where executives discussed cutting corners and falsifying results. She walked the jury through specific emails and memos, explaining in layperson's terms how Castellanos had knowingly sold defective armor to the military despite internal warnings about failure rates. The cross-examination was brutal. Castellanos' lawyers attacked her credibility, her motivations, her memory of events from years past. They suggested she was lying to get revenge for being fired, that her evidence was either fabricated or misunderstood, that her testimony was bought by promises of financial compensation. But Sarah held firm, her voice never wavering as she answered each attack with documented evidence and consistent testimony. And critically, she looked at the jury when she spoke, making eye contact with each member, creating human connection that transcended legal arguments. "I'm not here because I hate Victor Castellanos," Sarah said during a particularly aggressive cross-examination. "I'm here because 20 Marines died wearing armor I watched him knowingly sell despite test failures. I'm here because Captain Rodriguez died trying to expose fraud I witnessed daily. I'm here because staying silent makes me complicit in those deaths. And I have a daughter who needs to learn that doing the right thing matters more than personal safety. That's why I'm testifying, counselor. Not for money, not for revenge, but because the alternative is living the rest of my life knowing I let those Marines die unavenged." The courtroom was silent when she finished. Even Castellanos' lawyer seemed momentarily at a loss for response. Judge Morrison called for afternoon recess, and the jury filed out with expressions that suggested Sarah's testimony had landed with impact. Ryan met Rebecca in the hallway during the break. "She's winning them over. I watched the jury. They believe her." "Don't jinx it," Rebecca said, but hope shone in her eyes. "We still have to present the documentary evidence and tie everything together. Castellanos' lawyers are good. They'll find ways to create doubt." The trial stretched through the week, each day bringing new testimony and evidence, each evening bringing exhaustion that Ryan fought through constant coffee, and the determination to see this through. Zoe called every night from Montana, her voice a lifeline to the world beyond courtroom warfare, reminding him why he was doing this and what waited on the other side of victory. On day 7, the defense rested their case after presenting their own experts who challenged the test results and suggested that the armor failures were due to exceptional IED sophistication rather than design flaws. It was technically plausible, carefully argued, and almost convincing if you didn't have Sarah Vance's testimony and Captain Rodriguez's documents to counter it. Closing arguments happened on day 8. Castellanos' lawyer spoke first, spending 2 hours deconstructing the plaintiff's case, arguing reasonable doubt, suggesting that tragedy wasn't necessarily criminality. He was smooth, professional, almost persuasive. Then Rebecca stood for her closing argument, and Ryan watched her transform into something formidable. She spoke about her father not as a lawyer speaking about evidence, but as a daughter honoring her father's sacrifice. She spoke about the 20 Marines not as abstract casualties, but as people with families and dreams and futures that had been stolen by corporate greed. She spoke directly to the jury, asking them to honor those deaths by holding Victor Castellanos accountable. "My father died believing that truth matters," Rebecca said, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "He died believing that justice is possible, even against powerful people who think they're untouchable. He died believing that ordinary citizens serving on juries like this one have the power to make things right. I'm asking you to prove him correct. I'm asking you to look at the evidence, believe the testimony, and deliver justice for Captain Benjamin Rodriguez and the Marines who died because Victor Castellanos chose profit over principle. Thank you." The jury deliberated for 3 days. 3 days of waiting that felt like 3 years, where every phone call might be the verdict and every hour stretched like taffy. Ryan stayed close to Rebecca, providing support and security while she oscillated between confidence and terror about the outcome. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom reassembled with the same crowd that had filled it throughout trial, everyone understanding that this moment would determine whether 2 weeks of testimony and argument had been enough. Victor Castellanos sat at the defense table looking less confident than opening day, his lawyers arrayed around him like protective walls that were showing cracks. The jury filed in, none of them looking at Castellanos, a sign that veteran trial lawyers recognized as bad news for the defense. Judge Morrison asked the foreperson if they'd reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor." What say you?" The foreperson, a retired teacher who'd taken her civic duty with visible seriousness, stood and read from the verdict form. "In the matter of Martinez versus Castellanos defense systems, we, the jury, find for the plaintiff on all counts. We find that the defendant knowingly sold defective armor to the United States military, that said armor directly contributed to the deaths of Captain Benjamin Rodriguez and 19 other Marines, and that the defendant is liable for compensatory and punitive damages." The courtroom erupted. Media rushed to file stories. Spectators reacted with shock or satisfaction, depending on their allegiances. And Rebecca Martinez collapsed into her chair, tears streaming down her face, as 18 months of work and a lifetime of grief found vindication in 12 citizens' decision. Ryan felt something in his chest unclench, tension he'd been carrying since that Friday night at Romano's finally releasing. They'd won. Against all odds, against Castellanos' resources and lawyers and intimidation, they'd won. Captain Rodriguez was vindicated. 20 Marines had justice, and Sarah Vance's courage had made the difference. Judge Morrison gavelled for order and announced that damages would be determined in a separate hearing, but that the liability finding was final. Castellanos' lawyers immediately began filing appeals, but their client's face had gone pale with the understanding that his empire was crumbling. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed Rebecca for comment. She spoke briefly about her father's sacrifice and the importance of holding powerful people accountable, then excused herself to find Ryan in the crowd. "We did it," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "We actually did it." "You did it," Ryan corrected. "I just kept you alive long enough to present your case. The victory is yours." "It's ours," Rebecca insisted. "Mine, yours, Sarah's, my father's. Everyone who fought for this contributed to the victory. And now Castellanos faces federal charges. His company is going to collapse, and no defense contractor will ever again think they can get away with killing soldiers through negligence." It was victory, complete and total. But as Ryan watched Rebecca accept congratulations from supporters and colleagues, he felt the familiar emptiness that followed successful missions. The objective was accomplished, the enemy defeated, the innocent protected. Now came the hard part, figuring out what to do when there was no more mission, no more clear objective, no more enemy to fight. His phone rang. Ellen Webb calling from Montana. "Ryan, you need to come get your daughter. Not because anything's wrong, but because she misses you desperately, and because she deserves to hear from her father that the bad people are gone and she can come home." I'll be there tomorrow, Ryan promised. And Ellen, thank you for everything. Just doing what Marcus would want. Come home, Ryan. Your war is over. Time to figure out how to live in peace. That night, Ryan drove back to Cedar Falls alone, leaving Rebecca to handle media and lawyers in the aftermath of victory. The town looked the same as when he'd left 2 weeks ago, but Ryan felt fundamentally changed. The quiet life he'd built seemed smaller now, less substantial, a fiction that had served its purpose but couldn't be maintained. Mrs. Henderson met him at the door when he arrived home, her eyes full of questions she was too polite to ask. Everything settled with your emergency work? Everything's settled, Ryan confirmed. Thank you for watching the house. I'll be leaving tomorrow to pick up Zoe, but we should be back by the weekend. Alone in his house, surrounded by pictures of Sarah and memories of the life they'd planned to build together, Ryan felt the weight of decision pressing down. He could go back to being a plumber, could resume Friday nights at Romano's and coaching soccer and the comfortable routine of small-town existence. Or he could acknowledge that the past 2 weeks had reminded him of who he was beneath the paint-stained shirts, and that maybe that person deserved to exist openly rather than hidden. His phone rang. Rebecca, her voice carrying exhaustion and elation in equal measure. The federal prosecutor just called. With the civil verdict on record, they're fast-tracking the criminal case. Castellanos is going to be arrested within 48 hours on charges of bribery, fraud, and conspiracy. It's over, Ryan. Completely over. That's good news, Ryan said, and meant it. There's something else. Something I've been thinking about since the verdict. You're going to pick up Zoe tomorrow, going to resume your life in Cedar Falls. But what if there's another option? What if instead of going back to being a plumber who used to be a SEAL, you became something new? Someone who uses those skills to help people who need help that normal channels can't provide? What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we're a good team. You have skills in security and strategy and protecting people. I have skills in law and investigation and building cases. Together we could start something, a practice that combines legal expertise with the kind of practical protection that people like my father needed but didn't have. We could help whistleblowers, military families dealing with contractor fraud, anyone facing threats from powerful people who think they're untouchable. The idea sparked something in Ryan's chest, a possibility he hadn't allowed himself to consider. That's not a small ask, Rebecca. That's asking me to upend my life, to raise Zoe in a world where her father actively seeks out danger instead of avoiding it. Or it's asking you to raise Zoe in a world where her father helps people who need help, where she learns that courage and justice aren't just words but active choices we make every day. Think about it, Ryan. You don't have to answer now. Just think about it. After ending the call, Ryan sat in his living room and thought about promises, the ones he'd made to Sarah on her deathbed, the ones he'd made to Captain Rodriguez by accepting Rebecca's case, the ones he'd made to Zoe every time he promised to keep her safe. Maybe honoring all those promises didn't require choosing between them. Maybe there was a path that let him be both father and protector, both ordinary and extraordinary, both the man he'd been trying to become and the man he'd always been. The next morning, Ryan drove to Montana through landscape that shifted from Iowa flatland to mountain grandeur, each mile taking him closer to his daughter and further from the life he'd known. Ellen's ranch appeared as the sun began setting, sprawling acres of grassland punctuated by the silhouettes of horses and the main house glowing with welcoming light. Zoe burst through the door before Ryan had even shut off his truck, running toward him with abandon that made his heart hurt with how much he'd missed her. He caught her up in his arms, holding her tight while she chattered about horses and mountains and everything she'd learned in 2 weeks away. I missed you so much, Daddy, Zoe said into his shoulder. But Miss Ellen says I was very brave. Was I brave? The bravest, Ryan confirmed, and I'm so proud of you. Are you ready to go home? Zoe pulled back to look at him seriously. Are the bad people really gone? Can we go back to normal? Ryan thought about Rebecca's offer, about the possibility of building something new instead of returning to something old. He thought about Zoe growing up watching her father help people, learning that standing up for justice wasn't just stories but reality that required courage and commitment. He thought about the kind of legacy he wanted to leave, not through avoiding danger, but through facing it when necessary to protect the innocent. The bad people are gone, Ryan said truthfully, but I'm not sure we can go back to exactly the way things were. Some things have changed. I've changed. Is that okay? What kind of changes? The kind where Daddy might do different work. Work that helps people like the nice lady from Romano's. Work that's a little bit Navy and a little bit plumber, and hopefully all good. But it means our life might be a little different than before. More interesting, but also sometimes more complicated. What do you think about that? Zoe considered this with the seriousness that 8-year-olds bring to major decisions. Will you still be my daddy? Will we still have pizza on Fridays? Always and always, Ryan promised. Those things never change. Then I think different might be good, Zoe decided. Mrs. Patterson says change is scary, but sometimes scary things turn out to be the best things. Like when I was scared to start school, but then I made friends and learned about dragons who are ballerinas. Ryan laughed despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Mrs. Patterson is wise. Come on, let's go inside and say goodbye to Miss Ellen. We've got a long drive home tomorrow. 3 months later, Ryan stood in a newly renovated office in Kansas City, watching as workers installed the final sign above the entrance, Rodriguez and Carter Legal Protection Services. Rebecca had insisted on putting her father's name first, honoring the man who'd started this mission, even if he hadn't lived to see it completed. Ryan had agreed, understanding that some debts transcended personal pride. The office occupied the ground floor of a renovated building near the federal courthouse, convenient for Rebecca's legal work and equipped with the security features necessary for their protective services. Upstairs were conference rooms and a small apartment where Ryan and Zoe stayed during the week, close enough to Cedar Falls for weekend visits, but based in the city where the work was. Zoe had adjusted better than Ryan had expected, making friends at her new school and embracing the changes with the flexibility of childhood. She still asked questions about why Daddy sometimes had to work late or why certain people needed their help, but she'd absorbed the lesson that helping people was important work worth doing. Sarah Vance worked for them now, her inside knowledge of corporate malfeasance making her invaluable for investigating defense contractor cases. The civil settlement had been substantial enough to provide security for her family and seed money for the new business. Victor Castellanos was serving 15 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to bribery and fraud charges, his defense empire dismantled and his name becoming shorthand for corporate corruption. Rebecca emerged from her office with a file in hand, looking more at peace than Ryan had ever seen her. New client consultation in 30 minutes. Former Air Force sergeant who thinks her disability benefits were denied due to contractor misconduct. Sound like something we can help with? Sounds exactly like something we can help with, Ryan agreed. They worked together now, not as lawyer and bodyguard, but as partners who'd learned each other's strengths and trusted each other's judgment. Rebecca handled the legal warfare, building cases and filing motions and arguing in courtrooms where justice was dispensed through procedure and precedent. Ryan handled security and investigation, using skills learned in 8 years of combat to protect clients and gather evidence and occasionally remind powerful people that their power had limits. It wasn't the quiet life Ryan had promised Sarah he'd build for their daughter, but it was a good life, meaningful in ways that plumbing never quite achieved. And standing in the office named for a man who'd saved his life twice, once literally, and once by giving him purpose after years of drifting, Ryan felt something he hadn't felt since Sarah's death, genuine contentment with his place in the world. His phone buzzed with a text from Zoe, who was at an after-school art program. Made a new painting of Princess Flameheart. She's fighting corporate villains now. Can we hang it in the office? Ryan smiled and texted back, absolutely. Princess Flameheart sounds like she'd fit right in. That evening, back in their apartment above the office, Ryan helped Zoe with homework while Rebecca prepared dinner in the small kitchen that had become the heart of their strange new family. They weren't romantic partners exactly. The relationship was too complex for simple labels, built on shared trauma and mutual respect, and the gradual understanding that they worked better together than apart. But they were family in the way that mattered. People who'd chosen to stand together against darkness and who'd emerged into light still standing. Later, after Zoe was asleep and the city lights glowed beyond the windows, Ryan and Rebecca sat in the living room reviewing files for upcoming cases. It was comfortable routine now, the kind that develops between people who've been through war together and survived. Do you ever regret it? Rebecca asked suddenly. Giving up the quiet life in Cedar Falls? I know you built that for Sarah, that it was supposed to be the life you promised her. Ryan thought about it carefully, wanting to give an honest answer. I regret that Sarah didn't live to see what I've become. I think she would have understood that the quiet life was me hiding, not healing, that I needed purpose beyond surviving grief. But no, I don't regret the choice. We're helping people who need help. We're holding powerful people accountable. We're teaching Zoe that courage and justice aren't just words but actions. That's worth sacrificing quiet for. Your father would be proud, Ryan added, looking at Rebecca. Captain Rodriguez saved my life so I could be here doing this, honoring his sacrifice by continuing his work. That's the best kind of legacy, one that ripples outward long after we're gone. Rebecca's eyes glistened with tears she didn't bother hiding. I think about him every day. About what he'd say about this, about us, about the work we're doing. I like to think he's somewhere nodding approval and telling terrible jokes. He definitely told terrible jokes, Ryan agreed, though he'd only known the captain for 30 seconds of combat. Come on, let's get some rest. Tomorrow starts a new case, new people to help, new battle to fight. Always another battle, Rebecca said with a tired smile. But at least we're fighting the right ones now. Upstairs in his small bedroom, Ryan looked in on Zoe one last time before heading to bed himself. She slept peacefully, Mr. Tumbles clutched in her arms, her face peaceful in the way only children's faces can be when they feel safe and loved. On her desk sat the painting of Princess Flameheart she'd made that afternoon, a dragon in a tutu wielding a sword against figures in business suits, childish art that captured a central truth about justice requiring both grace and force. Ryan had spent 3 years trying to be normal, trying to bury the warrior under domestic routine and small-town anonymity. But that Friday night at Romano's had reminded him of something essential. Some people are built to stand between the innocent and the dangerous, and pretending otherwise dishonors both the people you could help and the training that prepared you to help them. Captain Benjamin Rodriguez had saved his life outside Kandahar, not knowing what that life would become, but trusting it was worth saving. Now Ryan honored that trust by using his remaining years to protect others, to fight corruption, to ensure that Rodriguez's sacrifice and the sacrifice of the 20 Marines who died wearing defective armor meant something beyond tragedy. The mission never really ended. It just evolved, finding new expression in courtrooms instead of combat zones, in legal briefs instead of tactical plans, in protecting whistleblowers instead of forward operating bases. The fundamentals remained constant. Identify the threat, protect the innocent, accomplish the objective, survive to fight another day. Ryan Carter had been a SEAL, a plumber, and now something new, a guardian who operated in the gray spaces between law and justice, who used military skills for civilian protection, who'd learned that sometimes the best way to honor the dead was to keep fighting for the living. He closed Zoe's door and headed to his own room, his dog tags hanging where they always did beside his bed. No longer a burden, but a reminder that some debts transcend death and some promises outlive the people who made them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new clients who needed help that normal channels couldn't provide, new opportunities to stand against the powerful on behalf of the powerless. But tonight, in a small apartment above an office named for a hero, with his daughter sleeping peacefully and his partner planning tomorrow's battles, Ryan Carter finally felt something he hadn't felt since Sarah's death. Home. Not the geographic kind, but the internal kind that comes from living with purpose and integrity and the knowledge that your work matters. The quiet protector had found his voice, and the world was better for it, one case at a time, one protected witness at a time, one powerful person held accountable at a time. Justice wasn't perfect. It wasn't quick. But it was possible, if you had courage enough to fight for it and stubbornness enough to never give up. Ryan Carter had both in abundance, and he was just getting started.